Recording in progress.
Very good. I'd like to call to order August 30th meeting of the City of San Mateo General Plan Subcommittee. Mary, if you could do the roll call, please.
One moment, Chair Robbins. It looks like we're having a little bit of a problem with the technical, so 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, Chair Robbins.
Here.
Vice Chair Wolnick.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Bonilla.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Chin.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Nugent.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Patel. Here. Subcommittee Member Rodriguez.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you. If you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody. It is a hybrid meeting, so I want to just remind folks that are not in the room, which would be most everybody who's participating, that when it comes time for public comment, you should do the hand raise on Zoom, and if you're on the telephone, you press *9 to raise your hand and *6 when you're called upon to unmute. So onward to the meeting. And today we're talking about GOPAs, the goals, policies, and actions for the circulation element and the land use element. Welcome all and staff.
Thank you. Good evening, subcommittee members. My name is Christina Horsberger. I'm the director with the Community Development Department, and I will be taking you through the first part of our presentation tonight. We're going to be talking to the General Plan Subcommittee tonight about our drafts, goals, policies, and actions, otherwise known as our GOPAs. I'd like to start off by introducing our general plan team, some of whom are here with us tonight, some are joining us remotely, and some got the night off and get to stay home. So our project lead, Zachary Dahl, Deputy Director with CDD, is joining us remotely tonight, and he will be facilitating the part of the discussion that follows the presentation. So he will be here for Q&As and to share different screens and to help you all as you move through the second part of the meeting. Brian Alexander and Mary Way are helping us support here tonight, and Joanna Jansen from our consultant team with PlaceWorks is also here, and we have several others joining us remotely. So a big thanks to all of them, as well as our technical advisory committee, which is over 40 members from SMC Fire, as well as other city departments, and we couldn't have done this without them. So for tonight's discussion, we will have the presentation, which is starting right now. We'll talk a little bit about next steps. As I mentioned, Zachary Dahl, our project lead, will be joining us for clarifying questions, which he will facilitate and help direct. We will then take comments from the public, and then you all will have time to have your discussion. So the objectives for tonight are to share an overview of the circulation element and the land use element of the draft general plan documents, receive public comments, and have a subcommittee discussion on these two elements and the GOPAs which they currently have drafted for them. So just an overview of the general plan. As many of you know, we kicked off the general plan project in 2018. We've done a lot of work since then, including a lot of community engagement. One of the things we've done is to develop a vision statement that is based on the city's values of diversity, balance, inclusivity, prosperity, and resiliency. Over the past few years, we have gotten through the vision statement, the values, as well as developing study areas, and going through various mapping alternatives to come to an agreed upon land use scenario, which includes draft land uses for our land use map and a draft circulation map. We are at the point now where we are talking about our drafts, goals, policies, and actions that will be contained in the general plan once it's fully drafted. On a separate line, we have our housing element, which is also being processed. That is one required element of the general plan. It is on a different schedule and time track, and it has already been drafted and is off to the state for review. So following tonight, we will do some more outreach and end up with a draft general plan for everyone to review early in 2023. And all of these steps are preceded and inclusive of further community engagement and outreach. And we do plan to have a final general plan by 2024. So you heard me reference the elements in the general plan, specifically the housing element. Element is just another word for chapter. It's just the word that we use for general plans. It's the word that the state uses in its common planning language. So in our general plan, we have 8 elements or chapters: land use and circulation, which are before you tonight; housing, which I mentioned was prepared separately; and then those that the subcommittee has seen before, which include community design and historic resources, conservation, open space, parks and recreation, public services and facilities, safety, and noise. And I would mention that throughout all of these elements or chapters, we incorporate environmental justice and climate change discussions. So there are other components of the general plan. It will include an introduction and appendices, a glossary and acknowledgements, as well as narratives that go along in the various elements that will support the goals and policies that we come up with. And then there will be an implementation plan, which will take place separately once we have a general plan and we know what we need to do to implement it. And that will include actions and also schedule for timing and who does what. So for our community engagement, we did a newsletter in July to advertise for a lot of the upcoming engagement that we're doing, including the last couple of meetings that we had. So as I mentioned, the subcommittee has seen some of the draft GOPAs already on August 11th and 18th. We have an online survey at strivesanmateo.org, which is our website that's dedicated to all things general plan. We have a virtual community workshop September 8th, a Spanish workshop on the 10th. We have an in-person open house also coming up in September, and planning commission meetings in September, and city council in October. The dates in October are currently tentative and will be finalized in the coming weeks. I would also mention that we have a lot of pop-ups and different tabling events that we're going to be doing. So September nights on B Street, the movie nights, and various other events in the city. We don't include all of those on the slides because it ends up being too much, but we are going to have a presence at a lot more events than what we show here. And again, strivesanmateo.org is our general plan website, and you can all get more information there, including the calendar. So future meetings for the subcommittee on the general plan will take place in September of 2023, following the drafting of the general plan, which will include environmental review and a lot more community outreach. There are 3 meetings planned at that time, and then in late 2023, the final general plan will come before you. And with that, I will turn it over to Joanna Jansen. She is our consultant from PlaceWorks and our project lead for all of the technical aspects of our general plan. Great.
Thank you, Christina. Oh, let's see, I think I need to move this a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay, sorry. Okay, let's see. Do you want to switch? Sure. Okay. Gone. So thank you for your patience. I'm Joanna Jansen with PlaceWorks, the city's general plan consultant. I'm going to just run through a little bit more about the 2 elements that we're talking about tonight, and I want to start by explaining what the goals, policies, and actions are and how they fit in with the overall general plan contents. So as Christina mentioned, each element will include not only the goals and policies that you're talking about tonight, but also some background narrative to provide context, maps, photos, illustrations, and then goals that are supported by policies and actions. So the background information narrative does not have the regulatory power that the policies and actions do, but it helps to provide important context for why the city is identifying the goals, policies, and actions that it is. So that will have some relevant data, maybe mention some other agencies or jurisdictions that are relevant to the topic. We try to keep these sections very succinct and not crowd them with individual pieces of information that will be quickly outdated after the general plan is adopted. Those are not part of what you're looking at tonight. We're going to develop that content based on the final revised set of goals, policies, and actions. We've had a couple of meetings now about goals, policies, and actions, so I won't belabor this, but for the interest of the audience at home, a goal is a description of the general desired result, what we're trying to achieve. The policy is a statement of rules or regulations that guide city decision-making. And an action is a measure or a procedure or something that city staff likely or others are going to do to help to reach the specified goal or to implement the policy. We arrived at the draft before you tonight by reviewing the existing goals, policies, and actions in the general plan that's currently adopted and getting staff review from all departments to see what's working well and what needs to be changed, and then adding our own revisions that we know are going to be necessary to respond to current state requirements. Right now, we're in the phase of collecting input from yourselves as the General Plan Subcommittee, as well as from community members, and then later the Planning Commission and City Council, and using all of that input to prepare updated goals, policies, and actions. So again, tonight's your third discussion of these GOPAs, but just to quickly refresh, we're going to look at the two elements of circulation and land use, and some guiding discussion questions to consider would be, what do you support about these policies and actions? What would you change? Is there anything missing? Whether or not we should consider changing any of the policies from a requirement to a recommendation or vice versa, and whether or not there's any specific actions that you would like to see added to support the implementation of the policies. We always provide this email address, generalplan@cityofsanmateo.org, for GPS members or members of the public who have detailed typographic edits to provide. We welcome those, and those are most helpful to us if we can get them in writing. So with that, let me give a quick overview of the circulation element first, and then followed by the land use element. So our circulation element, revamped circulation element, starts off by the first goal that really emphasizes a multimodal transportation system that is sustainable, safe, and accessible for all users. So I think you will see a common thread throughout the circulation element of acknowledging other modes in addition to cars as ways that people get around San Mateo in the 21st century. So this goal includes policies and actions that talk about things like complete streets and Vision Zero and pedestrian and bicycle mobility, as well as transit-oriented development, safe routes for seniors, and many other topics that support multimodal transportation. On these slides, as you saw last week, we've also taken the opportunity to include a little sidebar that acknowledges many other important agencies or other plans that also influence the context for transportation planning in San Mateo. And that might be federal or state agencies or other regional or local agencies. The circulation element will also ultimately include a map of San Mateo circulation network, and this map is required by state statute to be consistent with at the general plan, a land use map, and it's going to be based off of the preferred circulation scenario that was agreed upon through the extensive alternatives process that Christina mentioned. Goal C2 of the element addresses transportation demand management, which is an approach that's specifically aimed at reducing the number and length of single occupancy vehicle trips and encouraging sustainable travel behaviors. The city has TDM requirements in place for some parts of town right now, and so this builds upon those on the existing ordinance and policies, and also includes measures for education and outreach and partnerships to advance transportation demand management, or TDM. Third goal, goal C3, is really focused on pedestrians and building a safe, connected, and equitable pedestrian network, and thinking about the destinations that pedestrians really need and want to access. So this goal is where we find policies and actions about what new development can and should provide for the pedestrian realm, utility undergrounding and right-of-way improvements, pedestrian trails, thinking about access for users of all ages and abilities, pedestrian connectivity, safe routes to school, and also policies addressing the city's ongoing efforts to create and improve a pedestrian mall in the B Street area downtown. Goal C4 is about bicycles and micromobility. And again, thinking about a safe rather than a sage, connected and equitable bicycle and micromobility network. So implementing the city's bicycle master plan, thinking about first and last mile connections, thinking about bicycle related technology, coordinating bicycle improvements with other city projects, which is something I know has come up in your previous discussions, coordinating paving efforts and other types of improvements, and then some specific notes about individual bicycle improvements and locations. This is a map of the bicycle network in San Mateo, both existing and proposed facilities, including kind of the category or level of those facilities, and that would be part of the ultimate element. Goal C5 deals with transit and mobility services and really making transit a viable transportation option for the community. So we're thinking about ways to support increased transit ridership, policies and actions that deal with both Caltrain and California high-speed rail specifically, as well as shuttle programs, grade separation, and transit safety and transit access in new development. Obviously, when we talk and think about transit, this is a particularly important topic to consider the role of other agencies, as the city is not a transit provider. Similarly, here's a map of transit routes in San Mateo. Obviously, transit routes are expected to change over time. So this map may not, be accurate for the entire 20-year life of the general plan, but it's important, I think, to provide this information and show how the transit network is connected to land uses and other destinations in San Mateo. Of course, we still do drive cars. We still do need to improve and maintain roadways and understand and predict the experiences of drivers. So we do have a goal about roadway improvements. In this case, this is oriented towards reducing vehicle miles traveled and maintaining efficient operations for all modes in addition to cars. So this is kind of a place where we see a shift away from historic measures like level of service towards new measures like vehicle miles traveled that are more reflective of climate goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The policies and actions in Goal C6 include policies about roadway operations. That really has to do with traffic congestion, neighborhood traffic, truck routes, traffic signalization, emergency signal preemption and emergency vehicle access, and how the city will prioritize and time roadway improvements, among other topics. And again, here's a map of the roadway network that shows how streets are classified based on their role in moving vehicles around San Mateo. We've also heard a lot about parking throughout the general plan update. Goal C7 addresses parking management and is to use parking enforcement and curb management strategies to administer parking supply and maximize utilization of public assets. So this is where we talk about things like how to shared parking, bicycle parking, curbside management, thinking ahead about loading areas in new developments, parking maximums as opposed to parking minimums, truck loading, and other related topics. And then finally, we also want to be thinking ahead about future mobility and technology. This is a quickly evolving field, and we know we can't predict every advance that will happen in the next 10 or 20 years, but these policies and actions give some guidance about how the city might build a values-driven regulatory management and partnership framework to encourage emerging transportation technologies, even ones that we might not know about yet at the time of drafting this general plan. So those might especially focus on equitable mobility and mobility data, thinking about strategic partnerships and piloting different types of potential solutions, making sure that the city's infrastructure is future ready and able to accommodate intelligent transportation system solutions. And with that, we'll go on to the land use element and cover the goals and policies there. The first goal in the land use element is about balanced, orderly, and equitable growth and preservation. So this is about the need to plan carefully for orderly growth that provides ample housing and job opportunities for all citizens and is also maximizing the efficient use of infrastructure and limiting adverse impacts to the environment. So this is kind of our overarching ambitious land use goal here. So we talk about equitable development under this goal. We talk about the need for mixed use development, how the city may handle surplus land, and the future of legal non-conforming developments, how to think about annexation and new development in the sphere of influence going forward, and how the city will review new development. This, of course, the land use element is going to be including the draft land use map. This is kind of a preview of the draft land use map where you can see basically the existing land use map put together with the 10 focus areas, or study areas rather, that we talked about during the alternatives process. There will be a land use map that covers the entire city, citywide. The land use element also addresses well-designed development and thoughtful preservation, and this is in goal LU2 is where we have policies and actions that talk about things like development intensity, building heights, community benefits, and clustered development. Goal LU3 is about a diverse range of land uses. This is just our opportunity to acknowledge the full range of land uses that are needed for a complete community like San Mateo, and kind of have some policies and actions about each. So that includes policies and actions about housing, commercial development, retail, hotels and the visitor economy, workplaces and offices, service commercial uses, gathering places and publicly accessible spaces, including public art, and other types of public facilities. So a lot of different stuff under LU3. And then with goal LU4, we really move into some of the more focused planning areas in citywide. And the first of these is downtown, acknowledging and maintaining downtown as the economic, cultural, and social center of the community. So various policies about land uses, the quality of downtown development, historic structures downtown, and special events downtown. Additional focus planning areas are El Camino Real, which is addressed in goal LU5 to strengthen its role as both a local and a regional corridor. So adding housing on El Camino Real, thinking about landscaping and multimodal improvements along El Camino Real is covered there. Goal LU6 covers the Hillsdale Station area as a focused planning area to continue to promote transit-oriented development around the Hillsdale Caltrain station, building on the rail corridor transit-oriented development plan and coordinating with future plans for the Hillsdale Shopping Area Center and including a new Hillsdale Station area plan. And then finally, another focus areas that may not be unique to one specific spot, but we have several shopping centers in transition or shopping centers that may be in transition over the life of this general plan, including Bridgepoint, Shoreview, and Bel Mateo shopping centers. And we want to support the transition of those areas into vibrant districts with a range of housing, shopping, services, and jobs. And that's in goal LU7. Christina mentioned that environmental justice is a topic that's woven throughout the goals and policies of this general plan, and that's true. And we also have goal LU8 that really addresses it specifically as well. So this is to support the equitable health and well-being of all neighborhoods in San Mateo and all members of the San Mateo community. This general plan uses the term equity priority community for areas that might experience kind of the combined negative effects of both pollution and negative health or socioeconomic outcomes. And that's consistent with terminology that's used by MTC and other Bay Area agencies. So we have policies and actions about prioritizing community health and addressing health disparities, as well as the specific issues that might be unique to equity priority communities in San Mateo, both ones that have been identified so far to date, specifically North Central, and also the potential that additional communities may be identified in the future. So in those equity priority communities, we want to make sure that we're preserving the sense of community that people have who live there, their access to parks and recreation, and streetscape and safety improvements. One way of tackling this in North Central would be through the preparation of a new plan for North Central and thinking about city services and neighborhood beautification. In addition, this goal also addresses access to healthy food. So that might include locally grown food, thinking about retail food sources, policies about workplace wellness and health in schools, and also urban agriculture. We also use the land use element to include an overarching goal about community engagement and including everyone in community development decisions. That's goal LU9, and that's where we have policies and actions about inclusive outreach and equitable engagement, how we communicate with applicants, issuing community surveys, and an overall communication strategy for the city. Goal LU10 is about climate change and sustainability, making San Mateo strong and resilient by acting boldly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it covers a range of different topics, including acknowledging and planning for the effects of climate change, decarbonizing the building stock, implementing San Mateo's adopted climate action plan, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and this is where we talk about renewable energy and how to engage the public in these kinds of discussions. Goal LU11 is about a sustainable economy in San Mateo. And this is where we have policies and actions about economic development, local employment, telecommunications to support the business community, jobs to resident match, and support for small businesses. And also addressing commercial displacement, which, like residential displacement, can harm the fabric of the community. We also have goals LU10 about fiscal health, creating financial stability for the city to maintain the city's ability to provide services and improvements, and then development review in goal LU13, which is about the city's development review process and how we communicate with the public about that and fee information. And then finally, the last couple of goals in the land use element have to do with regional cooperation, particularly important when we think about the future of land use in San Mateo and surrounding areas. So this is about ongoing interagency cooperation with the city, as well as policies and actions acknowledging Plan Bay Area. And then finally, a goal to maintain the general plan itself and continue to ensure that it's consistent with state law and adequate and up to date. So this is where we have policies and actions governing how the city will handle things like general plan amendments and coordination with specific and master plans. So again, this slide is just a reminder as I close out here of the kinds of questions that you might think about to offer your comments. And with that, we can open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, staff and consultant. Yeah, we will do questions, and I think we can do it on both elements. And then, like in our previous meetings after public comment, we'll then have discussion, maybe zip through with your edits and questions, comments, and then we'll have a more general discussion if people would like that. I think that is a valuable way to proceed. Questions? I'll start. Eric, do you have any questions? Start
No
your
questions.
End. No questions. Rick?
No, not right now, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry,
Ken?
not right now, thanks.
Thank you. I do have one question. I love the additions of the environmental justice sections and the conversations about health as well. And knowing that the Office of Planning and Research is sort of moving down the line of possibly a new environmental justice element, and I know other cities are doing either an environmental justice element or weaving it through, like I think we have here. I'm wondering if there was any discussion of having an actual separate element, or did you find like that this was weaving it through was probably the best course?
Hello, this is Zach. Hopefully everyone can hear me. We did have that discussion about environmental justice, whether we wanted an element or whether we wanted to weave it through, and came to the conclusion that there are multiple elements that have a hand in supporting environmental justice requirements. And so that is why we chose to create that theme where environmental justice was woven throughout a number of elements, with obviously a big chunk residing within the land use element. So we did have that discussion and felt that it was most holistically represented by weaving it through a number of elements where it applied. And then Joanna, definitely feel free to weigh in if you have additional thoughts on that.
No, that's exactly what I would have said.
Great, thank you.
All right, I have a few questions, so I think I'll take my turn and then we'll keep going down the line. Land use element, and this is LU1, so right at top. I understand the language in the goals in the first policy, but I'm looking for the term affordability, and I don't see it anywhere in here, and maybe I missed it, but I think this would be a place where maybe it should go. But put it as a question, is there a reason we're not using that term?
Generally, the affordability really resides within the housing element. There's definitely opportunity to place it elsewhere if it's appropriate. So that could definitely be feedback if we want to consider that. But really, when we get into housing affordability, that's really where addressed within our housing element.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'll come back to this when we get to comments. Further in that same LU1, P1.6, so it's the sixth policy entitled annexation. There's a reference to unincorporated land adjacent to the city limits. And my question for city staff and a couple council members who are here, do we have any? I'm not aware of any from my park days. Is there unincorporated land adjacent to city limits?
Wouldn't that be like the Highlands or anything like that?
Yeah, I guess the Highlands up there, that's right. They're San Mateo, but they're not incorporated. So if they voted to, we're saying we'd love to annex them.
But that did strike me, that section struck me as something that was put in there a long time ago and has sort of been carried over, and now it's like, do we really want to keep carrying it over? But
I guess it's harmless, but now that I understand, you're right, that area, but they're not going to.
But
they
things
haven't come
change.
forward. Things change. Yeah.
And all it does is refer to all those lands outside the borders of the city.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So thank you. Thank you. Zach, you don't even have to chime in. Thank you. The next policy, P17, refers to sphere of influence. Is that defined anywhere? It's a term I know from foreign policy, but not in land use particularly.
The sphere of influence were basically our urban services area. So that is the area within city limits and outside city limits that could be annexed into the city. And so that would be the unincorporated areas within the county that are within the city's sphere of influence. So in order to be eligible for annexation, it would first need to be within the city's sphere of influence and concurrently our urban services area. And then it could then be considered for annexation. And so we do have the areas to the west in the county unincorporated area, and then also the Peninsula Country Club is actually an unincorporated pocket that's fully surrounded by the city of San Mateo, directly adjacent to 92.
Okay, just so I don't have to bring it up when we get to the comments section, I would suggest that if you're going to use first letter caps like that, you would actually define that somewhere with parenthetical. So I vaguely understand it, but that would be useful. Let's jump over to LU8. This is environmental justice, an important one. And you mentioned this actually already, this equity priority communities. I don't see that defined anywhere. And I've spent 5 years on the board of Samaritan House. I know the concept, but it's not a term everybody uses. So I think we might want to just define that. And my last question is over in circulation, and it's circulation 7. No, actually it's 5, the bottom of the page is 7. And it's P53, California High-Speed Rail. And I guess, unfortunately, it's really more of a comment than a question. It's just, it seems like it gets one little mention. This is a huge issue for us. If there's going to be a high-speed rail, it's going to be a huge issue of how we handle the land use in our city. So I apologize. I violated my rule. There's a comment. We'll talk about it. I am done with questions and sloppy into comments. Heather?
Just in reference to that,
yes, sir.
we've already requested grant funding to study improvements through downtown in the form of grade separations for high-speed rail.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I'm actually aware of that, but it seems like that's something that's going to need more of than a half inch in the general plan. It should be discussed. Okay.
Okay, so my first question is about, is there different treatment of like the bike master plan versus the transit routes versus something? Because when in your presentation, you mentioned the bike master plan being part of the general plan, and then when you talked about transit, you said, well, we know this can change, so it's just representative. Is there a difference in how we're incorporating it into the general plan, each of those maps?
I think actually Bethany Lopez or Sue Ellen Atkinson with Public Works, you might be able to weigh in on how our various plans interplay and then with the general plan as well.
Hi, good evening. Sue Ellen Atkinson with Public Works. The bicycle, separate active transportation plans like the bike master plan, the pedestrian master plan, also the upcoming complete streets plan, they're all supplemental to the general plan. I believe the bicycle network map was included as an exhibit in here. If it does change, I would imagine that could be changed similar to the transit routes map, but those do remain separate elements from the general plan.
Okay, thank you. And then just a general process question. Is there a difference between a public workshop and an open house? I noticed on the different dates, they're called different things.
And maybe Joanna, if you're able to clarify that.
Yeah, go ahead. So I think the one that's described as a workshop is the Spanish language workshop, and we're actually moving towards that being a little bit more of an open house as well. When we were originally kind of making our list of events and thinking about both the virtual workshop and the other public events that we wanted to have, I think a workshop in my mind is a little bit more of like, you come in and there's a presentation and then you might break into small groups and it's a little bit more structured and you're usually kind of expected to stay for the whole thing. Whereas with the open house format, we can set up boards or booths and then we can kind of let people come and go at their own pace. It's much more flexible and they can decide to spend all of their time at one booth or visit every booth and really focus on the topics that are of most interest to them, and however much time they feel like they have to spend, they don't have to feel like it's a complete 2-hour start to finish kind of commitment necessarily. So we wanted to make something that was a little bit more flexible and self-directed to respect people's time and ability to participate.
So the two, I think it was the first meeting was also described as a workshop, and that was virtual.
Let me go back to the slide. It's a little, here we go. Right, so the virtual community workshop is going to be a little bit more of that kind of presentation, Q&A, obviously you can join at any time, but it's structured as a whole event so that you would kind of participate from start to finish. The in-person Spanish workshop, after thinking and talking about this and working with our partner PCRC, who does a lot of interaction with the Spanish-speaking community and has a lot of connections there. Also, we're moving towards an open house format that would be similarly flexible as the in-person open house that I was describing. So it'll have,
Okay, I'm noting like the September 8th is an evening meeting, and then the September 17th is I'm assuming that's a weekend at 10 a.m. So you're gonna get different people able to come to different ones, and if they're different types of meetings, we might want to think about that.
Yeah, I think the intention is very much to try to create different opportunities. Over the past couple of years, we've definitely seen that virtual meetings have worked very well and have had higher attendance for us than the in-person meetings that we were having before the pandemic. So we want to keep those as part of the process, and we know that those work well for some people. And we also have heard an interest in meeting in person. And so you're quite right that the virtual community workshop on September 8th is a Thursday evening, and the in-person open house on September 17th is a Saturday morning. So this is really an opportunity to gather input from as many people as are able to participate. We're not necessarily, this does not include a kind of small group component where we're asking people to come together and like make a decision or come to consensus. So it's okay. We've set these up so that it can be okay to hear from different people and they don't have to necessarily be having the same conversation at both meetings.
And people shouldn't feel like they have to be at both?
People do not have to be at both. People are welcome to be at both, but they can come to whichever of these fits their schedule the best. And if none of them work, then we also want to create that opportunity for the online survey at strivesanmateo.org. And also, as Christina mentioned, over the course of already in August and over the course of September, you're going to be seeing city staff at a lot of different local events, and that's another opportunity to give input.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one question about, let's see, I got to get to the page, about the fiscal health. So it's about the action LU-A12.1, and it's fiscal neutrality. Study the feasibility and potential consequences of adopting a fiscal neutrality policy that would require developers of projects that do not generate net revenue to the city to approve land secured financing, and so on and so on. And I'm just curious, what kind of projects would this be applicable to, or would this action apply?
So I don't know, and maybe Joanna, if you can weigh in on the background of this. Was this a carryover from our current general plan, or was this a new action that was drafted?
This is a new action.
And so, yeah, because I'm not sure exactly. We'd have to look into further exactly. I think the goal is to avoid projects that were ultimately a financial burden on the city in terms of providing services and other aspects. But I'd need to look into that further to
I can
provide
just say
more specific information.
Not with reference to San Mateo specifically, but just in general in cities, the kind of project that's going to, or the potential revenue that a project generates from the city can really vary a lot based obviously on the type of the project, but it also depends usually on where the project is located. It's actually a relatively complex calculation in terms of both the project components and the other things that we're asking the project to provide or do or build, as well as where the project is located in the city and how, what the specific taxation rate is in exactly that area, how that area is served. Is there a police station right next door, or do you have to drive all the way across town? So it's not, most cities, there's not a single blanket answer that says every project of type X is revenue positive and every project of type Y is revenue negative.
Mm-hmm.
So it would probably be something that would have to be studied on a project-by-project basis.
Okay. I think it would be helpful for the citizenry to know kind of what this means in putting it in our general plan. Because I have some understanding and background on this, and what you said rings very true to me. Like, yes, it's going to depend on where it is and what kind of infrastructure it already has. And, is the value of the property going up? So is it higher tax revenue now? But, so there's a lot of factors in it. But I think that, the implications for this should be a little bit easier to comprehend as somebody reading it who may not be a layperson. Or who may be a layperson. So it's a worthy goal. I just want to make sure that we're getting what we need from it.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only question I had. Oh, go ahead.
And I think this is also something where when we develop the narrative for the general plan, this will help provide better context for what this is trying to achieve. So hopefully that will help clarify. And I think there's always an opportunity to look to make sure the wording is where we need it to be.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That was my only question.
Hi, I only have one question, and that is around goal C-8 in the circulation element, and specifically underneath that goal, action C-A8.4, equitable mobility technology. That action says, develop an equitable mobility policy and data sharing requirements for vendors to ensure equitable deployment of emerging mobility options with consideration of residents who may be digitally challenged. I was curious, who are the vendors in this context, and what data exactly would we imagine asking them to collect, and who would we share that data with, and why exactly?
So I think, and Joanna, definitely weigh in if there's additional info, but I think it's broad for a reason, because a lot of those we don't have answers to yet, because we don't necessarily know exactly what these emerging technologies might look like, how they might function. And so the goal is we want to set a context for how we would approach them, think about them, focus on the equity component of how they are rolled out around the city. But yeah, I don't know if we have a lot of specifics.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question to that. You may not know the answer, that's okay. But do we ask transit providers to collect and share data with the city already? For example, like, do we ask the bus system to collect data around riders and share that with us? Or is this something that would just be new for emerging mobility technology?
And maybe, Sue Ellen, are you able to provide insight in how we work with transit agencies right now in that respect?
Sure. Currently, we don't request data collection from transit agencies. They do at times do that on their own. For example, Caltrain collected data and provided jurisdiction booklets as part of their business plan creation. So there are occasions when we do get information from the transit agencies, but it's not, has not, to my knowledge, been at our request. And just on the equitable mobility technology question. Just as an example of that, we have a city shared mobility policy for shared mobility providers like e-bike providers, potentially e-scooters in the future, et cetera. We have requirements in that policy for equity priority communities and for ensuring that residents who are not who don't have access to smartphones, for example, can still make use of that technology. So while we want to leave this, as Zach mentioned, very vague because there are technologies coming that we don't know about yet, that's one current example where we have a similar policy to ensure access for all of our residents.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. Mary, do we have any public, any yellow slips from the audience here or hands raised elsewhere?
Chair Robbins, it doesn't look like we have any in-person public speakers, but we do have, are you?
You need to fill out a yellow slip if you'd like to speak, please. Ooh, okay.
Let me just refresh my screen.
Yeah, no, QR code. Appreciate that. Thank you. Just, yeah, no, we're city government. We're good, but we're a step behind on some of this.
Okay, an update, Chair Robbins, we do have one in-person speaker, and, and we have one person virtually at this time.
Okay.
What would you like me to set the timer at?
Let's go with 3 minutes,
Okay.
and I'll extend if it's necessary. Yeah.
Sky Nygaard, you can step up to the podium.
Yeah. So I thought the
Could you tell us your name, please?
Oh, yeah. My name is Sky Nygaard.
Go ahead, thank you.
Okay. So I thought that the general plan was very it was very forward-looking, and I thought it was, in general, really good. There were a few things that I think are high priority moving forward that I wanted to touch on that I think are very important to me. So one is I see that there's a lot of housing focus around El Camino Real. And obviously we need to put housing somewhere, and it is a main road, so it makes sense to put it there. But I do think there should be some thought about higher levels of pollution on that road since it has such high car throughput. I think that's just generally a consideration that we should add as part of all housing. I know we do through the environmental review, but when we push El Camino as a center of housing, it is, you are exposing more people to potentially higher levels of pollution. So maybe we should spread it more evenly in areas that also have high access. Another thing was that for bike lanes, it was mentioned explicitly that we want them to be accessible to everyone, which I think is a very important priority. And I think personally right now the bike network is not accessible to everyone because a lot of times you're near fast moving traffic and you have minimal protection. And I think that over the next 20 years, it's very important to have that level of protection so a family with kids might feel comfortable. Whereas I don't think there are too many parents who would feel comfortable sending their kids out alone onto the current bike network. Even if it's extensive on the map, the actual usability and safety might not be there. I also thought the mention of the bike share was good, the fact that we're looking at that sort of thing, but I only saw mention of regulation and not anything about encouraging it. And I think especially around the Caltrain, it could be very useful to try and encourage that sort of thing so that more people can make connections to and from their destination. And then of course you need a destination. You need the bike share at the destination as well as at the Caltrain. But, and then I think that it's very important for the traffic lights to be conducive to bikes and pedestrians. So I've noticed that in the downtown we have shorter light timings, which make it much easier to cross roads and makes life a lot easier for pedestrians. And I think that expanding that to more of the city where you think about multiple types of transportation when you design the light timings and maybe even having bike cameras that could notice people and that sort of thing. And I also love the idea of the bus rapid transit on El Camino. I don't know if that'll happen, but I saw that in the plan and I liked it. Thank you.
Sky, thank you very much. Mary, we have somebody virtually.
We do. Our next speaker virtually is Ryan. Ryan, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Right, good evening. Thanks again for your review of the general plan elements. My name's Ryan Motoshemi. I'm a team lead with Move San Mateo, a local chapter of Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. My comments are my own today, but I also wanted to echo everything that Sky had said previously, just +1 to his comments. I guess I sent I don't think this has gotten to the subcommittee yet, but I spent the early morning hours this morning and then sent it in later today, just a letter with proposed revisions to language in the actions and policies and goals. So I recognize might not have had enough time to get to you, but I'd love it for staff to, read that and take it into account, as I'm sure you will. But essentially, the thrust of most of my comments that I'll focus on right now was when reviewing the circulation plan, I was looking to see whether the draft policies and programs made reference to prioritizing active transportation and transit travel, which is something that I've gotten a sense the city is moving in the direction of, and the state with its climate plans for its climate action plan for transportation infrastructure is the direction that it's moving towards. So just an example of how I think we can revise some of this language is with goal C1. The goal is, it's as written in the draft plan, says design and implement a multimodal transportation system that is sustainable, safe, and accessible for all users, and that connects the community utilizing all modes of transportation. And I think on the face, that is it's like a good goal. But what if we instead phrased it as design and implement a multimodal transportation system that prioritizes transit and active transportation modes, is sustainable, safe, and accessible for all users, and connects the community. So just throughout our plan, are we writing in that value of prioritizing these modes that will help us combat climate change, combat safety issues, and really saying that we are a city that prioritizes those modes, even though we understand that we need to plan for all of the modes. So that's kind of just the one main thrust of my comments. And that really, that I hope that language, I would love to see that language taken through the rest of the goals and actions and policies. And I have proposed revised language in the letter, which anyone can feel free to look at your leisure later. So yeah, that's kind of the main thrust of my comments. I thought that overall it touched most important topics, and I would push for dedicated funding for the capital improvement plan and all of our other master plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that letter will make it to the entire committee and staff, and we'll all look at it.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mitch Spiegel. Mitch, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mitch Spiegel. I live at 4005 Wilshire Ave in District 5. Again, I appreciate you guys all bringing this together. I think that you guys did a great job with the plan itself, and it really was looking forward to how we build, San Mateo, not just for the people in the Highlands or Baywood, but for all of San Mateans. The point that I do want to bring up is related to housing. As a realtor, as somebody who sees, firsthand how, there are rules that are being put into place or movements that are being made to restrict rental and housing providers. And I would just urge this, committee to put some foundation to build that supply to really impact that problem. Rental restrictions don't solve the supply, the lack of supply that we have. And so I would love to see, similar to LA County, where we have some pre-approved plans, either for ADUs, for 4 units, for 6-unit buildings, similar to LA, and then putting some of the foundation and funding behind that so that low-income folks can access that, and can build that in their own homes and can build that wealth for themselves, and encourage that, because I think what we have now is we have a great plan. I think that, again, it puts it near transit, which is important. But I worry that the bureaucracy piece of it, I know firsthand that permitting and timelines can be a huge hurdle for even myself as a professional, but not to mention folks that, again, are in the lower socioeconomic status. So I would just urge that we dedicate some funding to that and put some foundations below that to impact the supply piece of it. I also want to make one mention on the bike lane piece. And I say this not to disparage any of the bike, friendly folks. But I think it's important to remember that when we institute bike lanes, especially those that take on-street parking, that directly impacts, again, lower socioeconomic folks that maybe are living multiple families to a 2-bedroom and have to park on the street. Those folks will then have to move out of those areas. They'll have to drive longer for work. It'll make it more difficult to hire, which again, we have an issue here of not having enough people to staff those jobs. So I just want to take that into consideration and just throw that up to the council, is that, again, I agree that, we need biking, but a lot of the folks that are living in North Central and those areas, they're not riding $2,000 treks. They're just trying to make ends meet. They're working a couple jobs, and I think we need to keep that at the forefront that, I like riding my bike too, but everything has a pro and a con. So I just hope that we keep that in mind as we go forward. And thank you all.
Thank you.
That looks like it's it for public commenters.
Okay. Well, it's too soon to take a break, so I think I'll just bring it back for
Excuse me.
comments.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Jordan Grimes just raised his hand.
Okay. That sounds
Jordan,
good.
you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Apologies, staff. I thought I'd unmuted earlier. Just a couple quick comments. I do want to second some of the things that Mr. Nygaard mentioned earlier. It's a little frustrating that we keep hearing about the integrations of environmental justice and equity concerns when we're not studying the single family neighborhoods for land use changes. That was something that really popped out to me. We keep, we sort of keep talking about this, but it doesn't come up. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that a new report by the Bay Area Equity Atlas that talks about the region's census tracts that are what are defined as segregated areas of white wealth. One of them is in San Mateo. It's the Baywood neighborhood. And so when you have our neighborhoods ending up on essentially region-wide lists of segregation, when we're talking about environmental and other types of equity, I think this is something that needs to make it into the general plan. A couple other quick comments. Like Commissioner Nugent, I do want to know more about the fiscal neutrality component in LU A12.1. I'm curious how that would affect 100% affordable housing projects. That was a little bit concerning to me just on first blush. So if we could flesh that out a little bit more, that would be great. And then in LU10, climate change and sustainability, encouragement and intensification of urban infill needs to be incorporated into the section on climate. Urban densification and infill is one of the 3 policy prescriptions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the latest IPCC report. UC Berkeley's Cool Climate Calculator, which is a planning tool for cities that looks at and assesses different potential strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, shows that urban infill and intensification of it is the most effective way for San Mateo specifically to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by far. I think that's it for me, but thank you as always for your time.
Thank you, Jordan.
Chair Robbins, that looks to be the last public speaker.
All right, I appreciate that. I think all those speakers have come before sustainability at one time or another, so I know them all. So it's time to do comments, and if possible, I would suggest we do sort of, flip through specific comments, and then we can open up to a broader discussion. If that doesn't work, so be it, but that would be my goal, and I'm looking at you, Seema, just because I think you should start, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, do we want to do land use first and then circulation second, or vice versa, or do you just want us to go through everything all at once?
I actually think everything all at once seems to work for me.
Thank you. I will start with the land use element. So I have a comment around our first goal, I believe, LU-1, which says to plan carefully for orderly growth that provides ample housing and job opportunities for all citizens, et cetera, et cetera. I won't read the whole thing. The first thing that struck me about this wording, plan carefully for orderly growth, I don't know if orderly is the right word. I'm not sure what orderly and disorderly mean in this context, but I think a word that we could use is balanced growth. I know that we all know we have a pretty bad jobs housing imbalance and have had an imbalance for several decades now. And so my entire comment is around how can we use this general plan to ensure that moving forward we are solving our jobs housing imbalance and we can drive balanced growth. So our previous general plan in the housing element had, I think it was a goal, it's H2.2, specifically around the jobs housing balance that said, I think it was a policy, maintain an overall balance of housing and employment within the community over the term of the plan. In the Planning Commission, when we approve projects, we are asked to certify findings for the project. And one of the findings that we typically approve or find is that the development will not be detrimental to the harmonious and orderly growth of the city. But time and time again, we have projects come before us that have a significant imbalance of jobs and housing if they're mixed-use projects, or over the lifetime of this general plan. We have new data now in the past few months showing that over the past decade, we created 7.6 jobs for every housing unit. And I think the challenge of this last general plan is that we had no tool to actually ensure the balanced growth. We had this policy which said to maintain an overall balance of housing and employment, but we had nothing we could do to actually do that beyond reject a project. And that's a pretty severe cudgel to wield. And so I know other jurisdictions have been thinking about this too. In Mountain View, in their East Wisman Precise Plan, they have created a requirement of 3 units of housing to be built for every 1,000 square feet of commercial. That locks in a healthy jobs to housing ratio. And Redwood City's general plan, they have specified a maximum additional residential capacity of 2,500 units, a maximum additional office capacity of 574,667 square feet, and a maximum additional retail capacity of 100,000 square feet into their downtown area as part of the general plan. So they have set actual limits, and when you do the math, those limits bake in a jobs to housing ratio of 1.15 to 1. So I would love to see us have a specific action that gives our planning commission and our city council a tool to ensure balanced growth, more so than what we have now, which is really just the ability to approve or reject projects on a case-by-case basis. Reviewing of new development. So this goes along the lines of that previous comment. There's action LU-A1.1, periodically review actual growth of both housing units and jobs, commercial and office floor area, and make adjustments to infrastructure and circulation requirements as necessary. I would like to see this be more specific. So right now, because of our RENA obligations, we do track how many units of housing we build every year, and we have to report that out, so we have that data. But I don't know that we track how much square feet of office we build. And I don't know that we track what our current pipeline looks like in terms of how many units of housing do we currently have in the pipeline? How many square feet of office do we currently have in the pipeline? I think I've mentioned this before in planning commission meetings. Because of these findings and me not having a tool to evaluate those findings, I have made my own spreadsheet, scraping the development website and creating my own pipeline. But I'm sure I've made mistakes. I'm not perhaps the most skilled or qualified in tracking that data. So I would love to see an action around that's more specific around maintaining a real-time pipeline of office and jobs, and then reporting out every year. We have to for RENA, our housing units that we build, but also our square footage of office that we build. So once we have these tools to ensure balanced growth, we have the data that we can base those decisions off of. Around policy LU-P39, I think this is still in goal LU1. This is the office park evolution. This one is about supporting the transition of single-use office areas to research and development, biotech and life sciences, and/or to mixed-use districts that include residential, retail, and services. I guess this is more of a question than a comment, but I was surprised that we are baking into our general plan a transition to a specific type of industry. And I guess I was curious why. So that's something we could discuss, I think, as a group.
Are you looking for a response from staff, or?
Sure. Actually, if you want to speak to that, that would be great.
So part of that was building off of the existing policy in the general plan as it was rolled forward. So I think there's actually a good opportunity for discussion around this, and if it's phrased the right way or includes the right focus. So yeah, I think this was a starting place, but there's no reason we have to stick here. And if there's guidance or ways that you feel it could be improved or focused or broadened, that's definitely up for discussion.
Great. Also in that policy, the last line is to retain or locate offices closest to high volume roadways and locate new residential uses as far as possible from high volume roadways. I believe our public commenter mentioned this as well. I've said this so many times in planning commission meetings, I have this memorized. California Air Resources Board recommends against citing sensitive uses like housing within 500 feet of high volume roadways, which are defined as 100,000 or more vehicles a day. El Camino Real actually does not meet that criteria, but what does is 101 and 92 east of El Camino. And so I just wanted to note what I feel like is a bit of a contradiction in our general plan, where we're saying that we have a policy to locate new residential uses as far as possible from high volume roadways. But if you actually look at our land use map, study area 7, and then also, I forget the study area, but along 92, we do have land use designations that are for medium density and high density residential. And so it just, to me, feels like right out of the gate, there's a little bit of a contradiction here, and we should maybe discuss that. Goal LU-8, which is about the equitable health and well-being of all neighborhoods in San Mateo and improving conditions in equity priority communities. There's an action, LU-A8.5, the North Central Plan. So the current language of this is prepare a plan for North Central that addresses the community's health and safety needs and improves circulation patterns in the neighborhood based on community direction, balance safety improvements with preserving the existing parking supply. There's something about this wording that when I read it gave me pause, because I feel like it implies that safety needs to be balanced with parking and that both are equally important. And I personally don't think that's true. I think safety is the top priority. So I wonder if there's a rewording here around maybe balance safety improvements with optimizing the existing parking supply instead of preserving, or is there some rewording we can do there that communicates that obviously the safety of our residents and citizens is a really top priority. This is kind of a very specific and in the weeds comment, but LU9, it's about, I think, I didn't note this in my notes, but I think this is one about outreach. So including everyone in community development decisions for a shared sustainable future. I've noted this before in the last few planning commission meetings, but I think we could do better about how we communicate information about new projects. Right now, we communicate a lot of information about characteristics of the project, but what we don't communicate is what impact the community can have by participating and speaking up. And so we have this challenge in planning commission meetings where people hear about a project, they organize offline to try and stop it sometimes, or to make significant changes. And they spend a lot of time organizing in their community, and then they show up to a planning commission meeting or they show up to a city council meeting, and that's where they learn for the first time that the project is protected by state laws that do not permit the city to legally deny them. And I can see how frustrating an experience that is for our community. And so I would love, as part of our outreach, if we expand the information we're communicating into helping people understand how exactly they can have an impact, what exactly they can help shape and change about these projects, so that people in the community don't have unrealistic expectations about what their participation can result in. And this is like a super in the weeds note, but I was looking at the land use map. I remember watching the city council meeting where they discussed the preferred land use alternative, and they were going through all of the different options and all of the different study areas. And I remember thinking at the time that there's a piece that's designated mixed use low right next to 92. It's across from the fish market. And I remember listening to city council talk, and they had spoken about designating it as mixed use medium, but it got recorded in the notes as mixed use low. And so this is just a note to staff, like maybe to go back and watch that recording and double check that to see if that particular area has been accurately recorded. Circulation element, I just want to note that I did have a chance to look at the letter from Move San Mateo, and I agree with many of their suggested rewordings. I wonder if this is a current sort of state-of-the-art or vocabulary thing, but one of the things that they suggested was replacing walking, bicycling, and transit everywhere it appears with the phrase transit and active transportation modes. So I just wonder if that's like a more modern way of referring to that, and that seems like a pretty easy change that we can make. So I had under goal C-1, I think I brought this up last time we all met in person. Can we have an action that requires the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure outlined in the circulation map to be implemented anytime a roadway is resurfaced? This is partially covered by action C-A4.2, but that only mentions bicycle infrastructure. It doesn't mention pedestrian infrastructure. So policy C-P4.3, first and last mile connections, encourage and facilitate provision of bicycle parking and shared mobility options at transit centers to provide first and last mile connections. I was actually wondering if we could change transit centers to the same term that's used in the goal, which is community destinations. I've always wondered why there's no bicycle parking at the movie theater. Every time we ride to the movie theater, we chain our bike to the gas pipe on Pacific Catch, and I keep thinking, this is probably not good. We should maybe have more bicycle infrastructure at our popular destinations among the city. I'm not going to go through the whole Move San Mateo letter because I think everybody here can read it, and I think a lot of the suggestions that they have are really good, like including vehicle miles traveled in our goals in addition to greenhouse gas, reduced vehicle mile travels. And then my last one was what I mentioned before around the equity mobility technology and the data collection. Perhaps it's because I work in tech, but anytime I see anything around data collection and data sharing, I get very nervous. And it is making me nervous that this is so broad. I think if we're going to have an action around data sharing requirements, we need to be really specific from a privacy standpoint about what we're collecting and who we're sharing it with. We use the example of the scooters, the e-scooters, and of course my mind immediately goes to, what data are they tracking? What are they sharing in the city? Is there a scenario where, there's a crime committed somewhere and our police department asks for all of the data to be shared about who rode a scooter in that area between a certain time, and because we have asked the scooter company to share it, we have it. I think this gets into some problematic privacy issues, and so I would just encourage us to be very specific about what data we're collecting, and we don't limit it just to new technology and new mobility options. We should take sort of an equal approach if we're going to require this of bike shares or scooter shares or autonomous vehicles, and we should require it of our public transport as well, so that we're not. I don't want to get into a situation where we end up disincentivizing new technologies from coming to San Mateo, because I happen to know a lot of the technology companies. The company I work for has very strict rules around data collection and data sharing, and I wouldn't want to discourage companies from operating here because they're scared away by those data sharing policies. Those were all of my specific comments, and then there's some things I would love to just discuss with the group, like points at which we might want to bump up, explore to require, and vice versa, but maybe we can do that after everybody gets through their comments.
Very good. Adam?
Here we go. Thank you, Seema. There's a number of things that you said that I'll second. There's also things that I hadn't thought about as well. I want to start out just kind of going through as well the policies and goals, starting kind of from the beginning. I first want to say yes, thank you for putting policy LU-P 1.1. That's the first policy, equitable development, front and center. I think that's a good thing. I'm glad you did that, and I appreciate that policy a lot. Questions that I have for that, looking ahead are like, what are some of the ways land use regulation can address and reverse the underlying socioeconomic factors that contribute to residential and social segregation? So looking at like what actions can we implement for this policy? What are best practices around other cities? I also like to see at least one or two actions that could meaningfully achieve this policy over time. So I think that's great. I'm glad you have that. The next one, the second policy after that, the require aspect, the optimized development opportunities. One thing I think about with require is whether requiring new development in major commercial areas to maximize the density. If we provide the ability, like if we say, this density is now 100 or 150 units per acre, maybe that isn't economically feasible right now. Could that providing a buffer actually hinder development? And so I maybe want to shy away from require to encourage. And so just seeing what that is. And I also want to note that I'll provide all my notes to staff after this, written on these, written down so you can see them better. And then the third one, believe me, I'm not going to go through every single one, but it just this first page I had 3 comments. The encourage mixed-use developments to include a residential component. I would, something along the lines of what Seema had mentioned, is I think that we need to balance new commercial space with the creation of residencies that improve and sustain the jobs housing ratio in the city. So something along those lines we can probably get into an action to satisfy what Seema was mentioning. I want to go to the next goal, which is the LU2, and it's the policy, the second policy, which is the community benefits. And I want to highlight the allow, so it's the LUP 2.2, community benefits. So allow density intensity bonuses based on provision of community benefits such as affordable housing. And I think that this is our opportunity to use the proposed height changes in our general plan over what's currently in place in our current general plan to really get as much below market rate units as possible. And I think that I would recommend building heights above what's now going to probably be the 65-foot height maximum based on recent state laws to be allowed only for projects. So recommend building heights above 65 feet only for projects that provide housing as a community benefit. So, I don't want to see a bunch of big office towers going downtown when we need housing more. And so, the increase in height, I think, should be tied to the provision of housing. And then also where housing comprises the vast majority of building space, and BMR units comprise 20% of the housing. So, the increased height should be tied to having housing be a major part of that building, and also providing a larger amount of BMR units than are currently feasible. So figuring out what is the maximum feasible without making development, without hindering development, then would be part of that. And then I also want to include one final thing in terms of the community benefits, and that's high quality materials and context appropriate design. I think that also needs to be a contingent on increasing heights in our city. We want to make sure that what people can see from further away is beautiful. And people like the old hotel, which is now Draper University. Like, people appreciate that, even though that's a taller building than what currently is allowed under Measure Y. And I think that can go a long ways to getting people on board who might be on the fence for that. So, community benefits, I really think we need to flesh those out at this stage, so that people who are on the fence about change can get a little bit more on board. And then I just want to note for land use policy 3, which is the next goal, the first policy, housing diversity, I just want to say yes to that. I don't have a change for that. But I do want to talk really quickly about policy LU P3.12, which is on the next page, which is just publicly accessible spaces. I do want to encourage designs of publicly accessible spaces that people can intuitively know that the space is available for their enjoyment. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of signage like, hey, you can come in here. Like, let's create places that, if it's a privately owned public space, that people can just know that you can use that. Otherwise, it's not really functioning the way we want it to as a city. So I think design standards for that is going to be important. I'm going to skip down past the area plans and go into the environmental justice section, which is goal LU-8. I just want to say I appreciate this a lot, and I was really pleased in reading all these. I want to go to the equity priority communities, which is down below. Just scroll down a little bit. So policy, keep going back up. Equity priority communities, so that policy. So policy LU-P8.2, so the community preservation. So it says prevent gentrification and displacement in the equity priority communities by protecting tenants, helping homeowners remain in place, and funding affordable housing. And I would say, yes, those are great things. Yes, I'm glad that's in there. The only thing that I worry about is including the word gentrification, mainly because that has a lot of meanings to different people and a lot of different meanings. And it has loaded meanings to it. And I think I question what that adds beyond displacement. I definitely think displacement is a much more accurate term and should be the focus of this community preservation policy. Whereas, if we wade into gentrification, like, what does that mean? Does it mean that we need to avoid adding, amenity effects where we can't, have nice sidewalks or clean streets or, good schools? Like, when you get into that sort of, we can't have nice things in this neighborhood because it's going to increase property values and it's going to increase rents here and it's going to push people out, that gets really sketchy, because everyone deserves to live in a nice neighborhood. And I think that the tools that we have should work dramatically on preventing displacement. And, for some people, gentrification means the same thing, but for others it may not. So let's just focus on that. So I would just say displacement for that. And then down to actions, so in the next page. And so the North Central Plan, I actually had similar thoughts about this. And I'm glad that you included this in here. I just want to state, I feel like that's a good first draft of it for the North Central Plan. But I do think like, I was thinking the same thing. We need to make it consistent with our transportation section goals. So we need to value human life above all else. So avoid language that might be interpreted as equalizing an adult's or child's safety with another's convenience. And so I took a small crack at, like, how could this be phrased better? And I would say, instead of the North Central Plan saying balance safety improvements with preserving the existing parking supply, I would say that maybe something along the lines of the plan shall seek to make the North Central neighborhood streets a measurably safer place while improving accessibility for residents and visitors. Parking availability and access shall be featured as a factor in assessing the planning and design of projects. Changes shall be developed and enacted with the express purposes of improving health, safety, and welfare and comfort for the members of the community. And so, like, turn it back, it needs to be about the community. It needs to be about figuring out how to make designs work while ensuring that we can maximize parking availability and access. So I think just, tweaking that can get us where I think we're going. And then the next one, just city services, which is work with residents in equity priority communities to identify services that the city or other partners could provide to improve safety and security in these neighborhoods. I would also add sanitation. So in my neighborhood in the winter months, there's major divots in very busy, heavily trafficked streets that people walk along, like major divots from cars just driving on dirt over the curb and just parking there, and trash gets thrown in there, and food and clothing and stuff, and it just festers in water, and it's disgusting, and there's there's like bugs, and it's right by where people and children walk to B Street. And I think that safety, security, and sanitation should be included as just as high in the city services aspect. And then finally, the neighborhood beautification. So the partner with neighborhood organizations and equity priority communities to support and promote neighborhood cleanup and beautification initiatives. As someone who has been a major part of that, I would like to see sustained programs to maintain neighborhood cleanliness and beautification efforts that don't necessarily depend on volunteer labor, and because it's a lot of work as a resident to get that going. And so it's good that we're partnering with neighborhood organizations, but maybe not relying too much on that. And then I'm going to skip down quite a ways to just to talk about, I'll just briefly mention, so the engagement part, and you had community surveys, and I say that, I just want to emphasize, yes, your surveys are really important because they help overcome self-selection bias of participants. So I'm glad that's in there. I'm going to go all the way down to climate change. And I have just one actual action that I would recommend. Yeah, climate change and sustainability. So I have an action that I would recommend adding, and it's to increase the urban tree canopy. I think that we should increase the tree cover throughout the city while maintaining existing trees as much as possible. We also need to identify neighborhoods with less street tree canopy and adopt programs to add climate-adapted trees to the right-of-way and front yards of adjacent properties. Now, this is something I'd mentioned in other aspects at other goals, but I think it needs to be included in part of our climate plan, because neighborhoods that were historically redlined and underserved and disinvested, they tend to have lower tree cover, and they tend to get hotter. And so I think that this is a major climate aspect that would be very helpful. And who doesn't love trees? All right, fiscal health. I had already asked that question about fiscal health. I'm going to go. I have another comment just generally about the land use that I wasn't sure where it would go, but after having talked to some folks in my neighborhood, and looking at the general plan, I think it would be helpful for us to make sure that our land use element ensures roughly equal heights along contiguous blocks. So there's some blocks where there's different, where it goes from like residential to mixed use, and it's hard to see what the colors are relative to the heights. And I think it would be important for the most part, where that changes from residential to mixed use, to have a consistent height between those two types of land uses. So it's just a little hard it's hard to get that to catch that everywhere, and I think that would be helpful as we transition between residential and mixed use. Circulation element, I have a lot of just comments that say yes, yes, yes. So good work on that. Let me see. One thing I do want to note for things like parking and pedestrian enhancements, so like around goal C3, but this is applicable to some other spots where it says require new development projects to provide sidewalks and pedestrian ramps, or to construct improvements or to underground utilities. I think that that's good, but we should probably have a threshold for development size, so that we're not requiring that of a fourplex or a duplex or something like that. So maybe like a threshold of 10 units, whatever is feasible, because it makes sense for larger projects, but maybe not like somebody who's doing a small project, to underground utilities on their street. And I think that probably is intended, but not. I think we got to be somewhat pedantic about that. And then bikes and micromobility. There was a number of suggestions that I saw from Move San Mateo that I liked in this area, so I think it's worth reading. And let's see. And then go down all the way to roadway improvements, which is goal C6. And I think this is just, I think everybody wants in their neighborhood, neighborhood traffic, so traffic calming measures. And so I think just looking at like how do we prioritize that, and it would be, I think it's important that we prioritize the implementation with using data and focusing on areas, maybe not exclusively, but focusing on areas with the highest instances of vehicle collisions, or so just kind of tie it into safety as well as general neighborhood comfort. Yeah, I like the parking maximums. I like the parking management aspects of goal C7 and the actions. So I think that's all good. That was it. Those are my comments. I had a lot of yeses in the transportation section, so I'm really excited about it.
Great, thank you. Heather?
All right, starting over. Back up. So I started in Action LU A 1.2, surplus land inventory. This was kind of a question of like, why are we calling it surplus land inventory? I mean, the action says maintain a publicly accessible inventory of publicly owned sites. And the title just makes it seem like it's extra land that shouldn't, like that it's not being used to its full potential. So moving on to goal LU 3, a diverse range of land uses. I think the word recreation may be missing from this. We do say parks, but I think we can call out recreation, and maybe with recreation and open space, we don't need the word park, but I think recreation's missing here. Policy LUP 3.2, commercial development. My note says add circulation, but I didn't mark where, so give me a second here. Safety. Okay, I'm gonna have to relook at that one, sorry. You have traffic in there, so maybe I just missed that, but I'll look at that. Policy LUP 314. I commented and asked a question last time about this and noticed it's the exact same policy we have somewhere else in the general plan. And it's the only one I saw that was like a completely verbatim duplicate, so I didn't know why that was. Oh, and I have it marked. It's a repeat of policy PS P5.2. And just to remind you, I did say it needed some wordsmithing last time. I think it's confusing to someone who's not in the business of planning to read. Moving on to focused planning areas. In the downtown area plan, action LUA 4.1, it ends with and support high quality pedestrian oriented design and architecture. I would like to replace support with prioritize, making downtown like the priority being pedestrian oriented design and architecture. I'd also like in the same one an action item added specifically about the pedestrian mall, something like making it a vibrant and community space, like a draw to the peninsula, something like that, that just sort of like sets this action for making that space unique and great. Moving on to ECR, policy LUP 5.2. I mentioned this, I think, in a previous meeting as well. I'd just like to see something about there being more buffer between cars and people on ECR to make it a more inviting and comfortable place. And I think Rick mentioned we had a tree planting requirement or plan. So something here, I think we should mention it. Moving along, action LUA 5.1, multimodal improvements. This one I was, the very end it says convenient transit and alternative transportation. And I think we're just missing like alternative to what? It just sort of seems to leave us hanging. I think it means alternative to single occupancy vehicle, but I don't know that for sure. Hillsdale, I'd like to see an action item added on working with, we have, working to make that surrounding area improves for bicycle and pedestrian, but I think we need to add in working with Caltrain to make sure that the station is as accessible for walking, or for biking, I should say. I think it's fine for walking at the moment. Shopping centers in transition, policy LUP 7.1. In the middle there, it says with mixed use development that includes retail services and housing. I'd like to add some sort of green space or green component to that as well. Action LUA 7.2, the Bel Mateo area plan. We reference it in other ones. We talk about biking and walking facilities, but it's not in this one, so I'd like to add it in just like it's in the Bridgepoint language. Maybe not just because it's a smaller site, so maybe it doesn't need to be as robust as in the Bridgepoint language. Moving on to community health, I had noted that you had said previously, Seema, about the 500 feet from 92 and 101, so I think I will double down on her comment on that one. Action LUA 8.3, city investment. we limit ourselves here, I think. So I love this idea, but we just say use funds collected by the park impact fee, which seems very limiting. Maybe we need to expand the action to including identifying other funding sources for this. We just don't have a lot of those park impact fees coming in at the moment. Policy LU P8.3, I just have a note, strongly agree, access to parks and recreation. I also flagged that action LU A8.5, that it does seem like you're balancing safety and parking, which seems odd to me. So I also took a crack. I liked Adam's wording, but I said something like we should balance the design of the safety improvements, not balance the safety improvements with parking needs. Something like that. LU P8.4, locally grown food, also love that. Policy LU P8.7, healthy food in schools. This might be a question for Ken, but I was just curious about what about summer? Does the school district have a program that we can support for the summer, or do we need to fill a gap? Do we need to, have something city run for the summer? Community, oh, do you want to answer that now? Policy LU P9.1, community outreach. I think we need an acknowledgement that we need some sort of adding childcare to the list of things we need to provide on the outreach to make the events more accessible for those that you shouldn't have to pay a babysitter to go engage in a public outreach event. Climate change and sustainability. I'm going to second Adam's comment about the urban canopies, and also say that maybe something about just reducing urban island effect. So I think it's tree canopy, but it's also, just less paved surfaces that reflect the heat and up that in our city. And okay, so moving on to circulation, I will also second the yes, 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 yes. I think this is a really great start. There's a lot of great things in here, so I'm going to get nitpicky. Starting with policy P1.3, vision 0. I don't like the squishy language, work towards eliminating. I want it just to say eliminate traffic fatalities. It's a goal, it's a policy, it's a goal. We should strive for that. Action CA1.4, safe routes for seniors. I love that. I love that idea of expanding it and really getting to that 8 to 80 concept of making everything accessible for all of our residents. CA1.5. So this ends with collection and analysis of data which reveals where highest concentration of pedestrians, bicycles, and transit trips occur. And I think this is a bit limiting. I mean, it seems like we're just looking at where things are, when I think what we want to be looking at is where do people want to go, and build the circulation routes for that. Because just as a personal example, there's a lot of places that I would bike in San Mateo, but I don't because I don't feel safe. And I know we have a couple projects in the pipe work, but I don't go on Fashion Island Boulevard, even if there's a bike lane. But I would definitely go into that neighborhood by bike if I could. So I think desired trips and destinations are missing there. Transportation demand management. Action CA2.1, the last sentence, consider parking requirement reductions for projects that include TDM measures. I support parking reduction requirements, but I don't understand exactly the use of the word consider there. Are we saying that we should consider what goes into the ordinance, or consider on a project by project basis? So I think that just needs some clarity on what that action is driving at there. Action C, A2.5, travel to schools. I think we do really need to focus on school trips as a way to reduce our VTM. No, VMT, sorry. But I think we use the term safe routes to school too broadly. I mean, there's so much that I think people kind of throw that out as just a term, but is that programming? Is that education? Is that infrastructure? What is that we're doing? Is it all of them, which I'd love to see all of them, but I think we need to flesh that out. And then I have an add action potentially that TDMs for private development, I feel like we're missing a component of resident education. There's a lot of programs that exist by various nonprofits and government entities. For example, BACMID has a program where you can trade your car in for transit and e-bike credits, and I just don't think people know about that sort of stuff. And so I think in a TDM, having like an educational component for their residents could be really beneficial, could be a good use of that. Pedestrians, CP 3.2. Pedestrian enhancements with new development. I'd like to see something in here about, I'm not sure how it exactly would go in, but just that we should have the widest sidewalks that are feasible and comfortable with it and work with the design. I'm thinking, for example, this Station Park Green development has like on Concord Ave has these like really nice wide sidewalks to use. And I know we suffer from really narrow sidewalks around San Mateo in a lot of places. The utility undergrounding, as I mentioned, I think this is a great idea. I was just a little confused why it was in the pedestrian network goal and not with the other places we talk about utilities. Action C, A3.1, implement pedestrian improvements. I feel like we need some urgency in this action item. This is something, I mean, we should be doing as fast as possible. Pedestrian connectivity, action C, A3.5. I'd like to see something in here about increasing sight lines and removing conflicts with at the crosswalks. Specifically, I'm thinking about, like, as an example, downtown, we've replaced some of the like end parking spots that back out into the crosswalk with bike parking, but there still exists like parking spots that someone backs out into the crosswalk. So that's just one example of like an intersection improvement that I think we need to have some sort of action about, like the visibility at intersections for pedestrians. Bicycles and micromobility, action CA 4.3. We talk about overcrossings. I just wonder if we want to put in undercrossings. I think that's probably not possible on 101, but 92 has a bunch of undercrossings, and I don't think we would go over 92 in a lot of places within our city. Let's see. We have CA 4.6 bicycle detection devices. We talk about installing them on existing and planned bikeways, but I think we're missing at intersections. I mean, there's a lot of intersections that don't, like the signals don't traffic or trigger for bikes, but they're not necessarily a bike route, but it's perfectly fine for a bike to be on them. So I think we need to expand that to our existing traffic signals. Transit and mobility services, CP 5.1, increased transit ridership. I'm not sure what we would do about this particular one, but I'm hearing from conversations with Samtrans folks that it's not really a ridership shortage they have, but an operator shortage. So I'm not sure how the city can help with that, but it seems like some way to kind of expand this language so it's not really increasing the ridership, but it's increasing sort of the service or something like that, like however we can help with that. Policy CP 5.5, transit safety. This one to me seemed like it actually should be maybe 2. We're lumping access, comfort, or safety, access, and comfort in with an education component. So I wonder if like the education should be a separate policy. And also I think it's limiting educate the public about the benefits at transit centers and bus stops, and it seems like we should just educate the public everywhere. So I think that's a little bit limiting. All right. Action CA 5.2, transit experience improvements. There's language in there. Energy efficient street lighting program at transit stops in disadvantaged communities. I think we want to say with a focus on locations in there. I want this to go where it's needed, but it seems, I don't know, the way it was worded just seemed odd to me. I think there should be a focus there, but it shouldn't be limited. Okay, last one. Roadway improvements, policy CP 6.4, neighborhood traffic. I would like to see something in here about reviewing our, sort of the process for residents to ask and get traffic calming measures on residential streets. It seems, it's a bit hard the way that it's currently written. And I think we should be encouraging that. That's it for me.
Thank you. I'll be a little briefer, but I do want to say one thing that I agree with much of what's been said previously, and we can discuss this maybe at the full discussion phase, but I do think folks need to remember this is the general plan, and I take a little issue at some of the micro detail, not necessarily in language, but bear in mind that a lot of things, I'll just give an example in my own wheelhouse, a little bit climate action, greenhouse gas reduction. That's something in the plan. It makes sense. I wouldn't dig down into the elements of the REACH codes because that's something that's going to, these aren't goals we would put in here. Those are something that'll go through the commission and then the city council. So I just think we need to stay a little higher level. I hopefully will stick to that. We'll see, to my own counsel. Very first would be what everybody starts with, and I mentioned this in my questions. It's the very beginning, the first goal, LU1 and LUP1.1, the first policy. Just in the spirit of being transparent, we are talking about, I like the term balanced rather than orderly growth, but we're talking about housing opportunities. We use terms like economically vulnerable populations. I think we need to call it what we're calling it. We need to throw the word affordability into both that goal and that policy. We do use it later on at environmental justice, I think, but even though it's land use, not housing here, that's kind of what we're talking about. So I don't think we should hide that. It's important. My next comment is at LU P2.5. This talks about development and thoughtful preservation, this clustering, which I think is great, but I think it's missing something. It pops up elsewhere, but I think the concept of access to commercial services is missing there. That's really one of the key elements of clustering, is to give an opportunity for, as things are developed, to have commercial products and services available, groceries, et cetera. That pops up elsewhere, but I think it's missing here. It's not just about historic resources and habitat conservation. It's also about access to commercial products and services. Then I go on, this was an earlier comment, LUP 3.9. This talks about office park evolution. I think this is important at sort of the general plan level. I agree with an earlier comment that I don't know why we should be dictating the type of technology or business. I mean, it'd be nice if we were czars, but we still have private property, and I think there's limits to what we can do there and limits to what we should be doing there. But I actually like the rest of this, so I would propose just deleting the phrase research and development, yada, yada, up to the and/or. So it would talk instead about support the transition of single-use office areas to mixed-use districts and include residential retail. I mean, that's an evolution of our city that I think the general plan is trying to address, that keeps it from being totally bifurcated as sleepy residential and commercial. I mean, you want people in a semi-urban environment to have all these things available to them. Now I'm going to jump all the way over, and I promise not to do this often, but I'm going to do a yes like some others did. This is at LUP 8.5. There's another access to retail sources when we're talking about, this happens to be in the food world, on community gardens, all that's great. But in 8.5, that's really part of what I think we should be doing. We're talking land use here, is making sure that neighborhoods, areas that are developed, have services available. It implicates everything, right? People then don't have to get in their car all the time to go off and go grocery shopping, which we're talking about food here. The healthy food in schools, big fan, but I also know there's limited to what the city can do. That's really in the school board and Federal Department of Agriculture, something I've worked on 100 years ago. Jumping to LU10, the goal, LU10. Now we're in climate change and sustainability, area I have to live in with my commission work. This one's just a little bit petty, but I just didn't like the word boldly. I think we need to be strong and resilient, and we need to act to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we're doing that. I don't know what it means to do it boldly. I think significantly is what it does. I don't think we should be flamboyant or loud. We just need to do it. And it's there. That's probably not my best comment, but there it is. Okay. Just didn't like boldly. Okay. Ken's gonna laugh at me. Go ahead. Down on that same page, solar energy and renewable energy and building decarbonization are all great things, but something that's missing here, I know this is land use, so it's not all inclusive, but I do think this would be an area to mention infrastructure, particularly in multi-unit developments, because that's really the big issue in adopting all these cleaner energies. And I won't get into the nitty-gritty, but I think that's something that probably could be put in there, just the need to have, because that is something we can actually require, infrastructure, and we're going to need it, the city can. I would go over to LU11, it's economic development, and my suggestion comes under P11.3, state-of-the-art telecommunications. That's all good, we do support it, but I think the real goal here, and we should state it, is and support remote work options. That's not mentioned anywhere. So it's not just local business needs, it's the ability to keep people in their homes and not driving around and not having to have office towers to work in. So supporting remote work options. And then to circulation. Okay, now I am going to get down into the weeds, and this probably has no business in the general plan, but it's been a bone to pick that I've had for 1,000 years, so I'm going to mention it. This is in Policy C, P1.5, about El Camino Real. It's good to prioritize high-capacity travel, and maybe the general language I would suggest is call it high-capacity and facilitate efficient travel. I mean, the bottom line is we need to limit left turns during high commute hours. I mean, it's been a problem forever, and it's something the city can't do much about because it's a state road, but it bogs down totally during those times of day. I had an example of that on my way here this evening, but we won't go into that any further. Policy C, P5.3, high-speed rail. I mentioned this in my questions. I think it's a huge issue tied to land use, and I think we ought to maybe add something to there about preserving, character, that's a bad word probably, preserving access to downtown and the neighborhoods. I mean, the problem with high-speed rail in this city and most of our cities is what it's going to do to the neighborhoods through which it goes. And, it's going to be addressed and hopefully effectively, but it's something that we ought to make sure that we're not, quite frankly, screwing our citizens who happen to live near the tracks right now by building, a giant wall or something. We've got to do something there that works. So I think that should be part of the goals. My last one is roadway improvements, goal C6. And this one others have talked about, I think, but here maybe I just wanted to be a little more plain speaking, which for a lawyer is not always easy to do, but we talk about achieve the system, accommodates future growth, reducing VMT per capita, great. At least we explain what that is. Most people don't know. It maintains, where we say efficient operations for all modes, I would say efficient and safe operations. And we might as well say for all modes, but I would also say for all residents. That's kind of what we're talking about. It's not just the different modes of transit, it's the people who are using them. And that is the end of my comments. And I apologize if I violated some of my own policy views. I'm getting a vote for a break. Would that work for all? A bio break, 5 minutes, 10-minute stops? All right. And I see snacks. So we'll have a break. Sorry, those who are virtual, you don't get the snacks.
Perfect timing, Ken.
Yes. You should have suggested before I spoke.
I was about to, but then you went in, so I'm like, no, I was going to stop you. Yeah,
I'm always good to be sure.
hilarious.
I believe we are back. Thank you, everyone. And recording is on, correct? All right. So we're at comment phase, and Ken, it's your turn.
All right. Okay. So I'll use the phrase that Heather used. Let's start back at the beginning, right? Back in the land use. So one just overall comment. I do really like how, again, the environmental justice section is highlighted and is parenthetical there at the end. I kind of wonder, and this is just a wonder, whether or not like climate change and sustainability in some ways would have somewhat the same thing, because when you think about how people go through the general plans and pick out things, they may want to know which ones reflect climate change. Or do something like what the San Mateo County General Plan just recently did, which they do have an energy and climate change element. And so I know our previous planning director was very adamant about only having the required number of elements, what was by state law. But I know cities up and down California add different things based on their community, culture, and need. So just a wonder there. Skipping all the way down, I will just say that I really liked a lot of the comments that everybody else has had, and I think it's really fortunate to go at the end because I get to think about things in different ways and modify my comments. One specific comment would be just on, it'd be nice to know which policies were basically legacy policies. I know that we talked about there's some verbiage here that is maybe carbon copy from the previous general plan, and we're like, wait, why is this here? And this doesn't make sense in today's time. And so it would be kind of nice to know. Specifically, there is one, policy LU-P3.14, which is the school site reuse and redevelopment. This is exactly carbon copy from our previous plan, and the first time I read it, it didn't make sense at all to me, and I wondered why this was in here like this. And then I realized it's exactly the same thing. So my comment on this, and trying not to wear my school district hat, but the city hat that I'm in, would be the first sentence. School site reuse and redevelopment. Ensure the reuse or redevelopment of public school sites is compatible with surrounding land uses. And just be done. That's period. Because the rest of it talks about, densities, educational uses, some other things that I don't think is maybe pertinent. But then it talks about public recreation facilities. And if I had to guess, thinking way back when this was put in the old general plan, I think it was specifically citing Bayside Park, because as I mentioned at the last meeting, the school district and the city has a 55-year lease on that property, and it is both hamstrung the school district and the city in terms of redevelopment. So my thought is that maybe what we do is have an actual policy that references Bayside Park, because that lease will come up at the end of this general plan in 2040. So some sort of resolution about that. El Camino, jumping down to LU5, I like the El Camino landscaping, but it segments, it doesn't include downtown. So it talks about El Camino landscaping north of Tilton and south of 9th Avenue, but it doesn't talk about downtown at all. And so I feel like there needs to be a downtown landscaping discussion there. Also, I think in the action in LU-A5.1, multimodal improvements, I think alternative transportation is an old term of art, and I think we're all using active transportation now. Question, actually, I know, Heather, you brought up a school district question, but I'm going to put it back on a parks question under LU8, the action LU8.3, city investment. Use of funds collected by the park impact fee to invest in programs and public improvements. To my understanding, I thought that the park in lieu fees were only supposed to be for physical park infrastructures improvements. And so when I see this, when it talks about programs, I thought that wasn't allowed. And so, and Cliff here is shaking his head, I don't know.
That's my understanding, that they're tied to capital
I thought we had,
improvements. Has that
I
changed?
thought we had in lieu fees and impact fees, but maybe I'm wrong on that. I should know that as the sitting park commissioner, but I think there might be both.
I think there are both, right? And so I think the in lieu fees are more flexible, but the impact fees, as this is referencing, I think it should only be for public infrastructure, I think. So I would just check on that. And oh, was it reversed? Oh, maybe.
Probably someone who actually knows the answer should answer this.
Either way, it'd be great to clear that up for the future, yeah. When we get to access and parks, LU-P8.3, access to parks and recreation, I feel like the last sentence when it says continue to maintain King Center since this is a critical facility in the neighborhood, I almost feel like that the King Center should be highlighted as a separate policy or action. I think in the through the parks master plan, we have talked about multiple times how to modernize and upgrade the King Center. And I mean, beyond just maintaining it, it feels like there's a lot of need to sort of enhance it and really bring it up and modernize it. Specifically that basketball court that we've seen. Actions, LU-A8.5, the North Central Plan. I think Seema, you brought that up. One thing that I would say, I know there's a lot of discussion here about the parking supply here. I think it was in the early 2000s or late 1900s. That does not sound right. I think it was through San Mateo County, but there was a North Central community-based transportation plan that was very well received. It was the basis for a lot of improvements that were identified in the pedestrian bicycle master plan, which then fed into the sustainable streets plan, and safety was a huge thing. And so I would maybe either reference that, or maybe there's a policy there to like do a new one, because that plan was really highlighted and lauded for the thousands and thousands of public support or public input from the actual community at that time. Here's the one, Heather. Locally grown food, LU-P8 for the school district, use of funds for the city's park impact fees. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. But during the summer, this is what happens when you write at an angle here on the iPad as you're listening to everybody's comments. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to focus here. During the summer, especially during the pandemic, the school district did provide food to the community, and it did that through a grant from the state and everything else. Historically, the school district has not. It has provided food for those in summer schools, but not for the general community. So if the city decides to have an opinion on that, I think we'd welcome it. Okay, I'm going to try and speed through here, sorry. Under LU10, the climate change and sustainability, I feel like we are missing a action item or a policy on recycled water. I feel like that we need to move in that direction, and I feel like there should be something there. Under state-of-the-art telecommunications, LU-P11.3, I feel like what we're talking about is actually public Wi-Fi, which I mentioned last time. I feel like that's a great place to insert that. The fiscal health, the action, I kind of agree. We talked about this, others talked about this. The fiscal neutrality, that one was a new one to me, and I don't really fully get that still. I mean, I think I get the intent, but this is really foreign to me, and I think I need some more, whether it's the background description that you talked about that will be added or something. This one was just a big question mark there. Okay, let's go on to circulation. Overall, in terms of circulation, I feel like there needs to be a policy or a goal about connecting neighborhoods and reducing barriers, because when you look at how we deal with traffic, we have put up, there's a way to actually reduce traffic impacts and high levels of impact to certain intersections if we looked at maybe reconnecting streets and reducing barriers. And the natural barriers and man-made barriers, such as either El Camino or the freeways or the railroad tracks or the highways, or even the ones that we put up, like the wall that separates the Shoreview neighborhood and our new parks along J. Hart Clinton. I understand that back in the day, of course, for those who don't know, right, we had our landfill there, and that's why we put up the wall, because it was a huge landfill. But now that it's a great park, there seems like you could easily do some sort of connection, a street connection there that would reduce traffic. And as a perfect example of this is our connections that now go under the railroad tracks at 28th and 31st. Because before, our only connecting streets there were 25th and 31st. Now we have two other streets, and so when you actually connect streets there, you can actually reduce traffic overall. We've had conversations about this, like another underground railroad crossing for ped and bikes, maybe around 37th or so. But the whole idea of connecting neighborhoods or connecting streets again is something I think that would be really good for our circulation element. As another example, down on 17th Avenue, when we used to have the Hayward Park Caltrain station there, at that vacant lot, there used to be another railroad crossing there, and once it's gone, it sort of ruins the whole traffic pattern. So, sorry, that's just a high-level thought there. I'm just going to skip these little minor notes here. When we talk about travel to schools, I feel like there should be maybe an action item there for the school safety speed zones. I know that the city is still looking into that, but I feel like that there could be some action item there in the general plan to promote safety and around schools. Flying through here. When we get to goal C6, the roadway improvements and the action items under that, I know that we used to do annual ped and bike counts. I know that we do through our traffic surveys, and we put out the tubes. We have data for vehicles. When you really think about how the city is trying to be more multimodal, it'd be great to actually have actual counts on an annual basis at different intersections so we can track how well we're doing. And so it feels like there could be an action item there. When we get into parking, I love these discussions, unbundling and everything else, but the public parking section and the shared parking, one thing that the downtown Redwood City did really well is that every new development that goes up, it's a shared parking agreement. So all those developments at nighttime, the public can use those parking facilities. And we currently don't have a shared parking agreement in our downtown. So as, let's say, Drager's redevelops, or even the new office buildings that are across the way on, who's developing those? Windy Hill, or right next to our Kiku crossings. The thought is that any new development that's there really should enter into agreement of a shared parking so that we can use those parking facilities after hours. So I feel like there should be some sort of mention there as a policy or an action item for the downtown parking. And I think that is it. So overall, I think it's great, and thank you for all your hard work on this.
Thank you. Rick?
Yes?
Your turn.
Thank you.
If you don't
Mr.
start soon
Chair.
enough, we'll skip you. Be careful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, let's, since we're back at the beginning, I do feel like the goal LU1 should include some reference to affordable housing. So, but rather than just affordable, where it says in the first sentence on the top line, provide ample housing or housing which is affordable at all levels. Okay, so not just affordable, not just market, not just middle, but affordable at all levels, which is what we actually need. Some mention of affordability there. So, and then I went to LU P3.9. And where it says in the last sentence, it says, as far as possible from high volume roadways. I think we need to have some specificity there. I mean, that's just really, really vague. And I know that we don't need to beat that bush because it'll probably be worked out later, but that's just one of the areas where I know we need some specificity there. Next one, LU P6.1. I think we need to add something about mixed use. So where it says world-class transit in the third line, world-class transit-oriented mixed-use development. And I know it kind of refers to mixed use a little farther down, I think, in the next policy. But I think it's important because what we've been talking about as we've been going through the study areas is basically all mixed use, and that's basically the way Bay Meadows was developed as transit-oriented mixed-use development. So we should probably refer to that whenever it's appropriate. Okay, I didn't write down the policy number here. Oh, where it talks about the shopping centers. And it mentions in the P7.1, Bridgepoint, Shoreview, and Bel Mateo, and then it has actions for Bridgepoint and Shoreview and Bel Mateo. What happened to Shoreview? Were there supposed to be some actions for Shoreview, or did we just? And when we talk about Shoreview, we're talking about the Shoreview Center on Norfolk near 3rd Avenue. Is that what we're talking about there? Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was just wondering if there should be some actions shown for that, since not there. On just a couple pages down, which is page 18 of the document, that was page 16 there, so 2 more pages down. And yeah, my notes are not clear. I just wrote yes. So thank you very much, yes. Oh, on the next page down, access to healthy foods and healthy food access. Here, healthy food in schools. I believe that that's not only, as Cliff mentioned, federal, but also healthy food access. I know that the county health department has taken this as their purview. They really work on this a lot. They have programs for this. So I don't know what the city would be looking to do in this arena, but something we should all be concerned with, and we should try and be sure it gets done, but I don't know that it's really the city's purview there. Policy P10.2. This is where boldly happens above. So I disagree with Cliff, I'll just say that. And we'll leave it at that, like he's a lawyer and I'm a carpenter, so. But on P10.2, it says, eliminate the use of fossil fuels as an energy, and reduce the use of fossil fuels as an energy source in the existing building stock. And that reduce word is what I think needs to be rethought, because this is the plan 2040. And by the time we get to 2040, if we have not eliminated the use of methane, we're going to have a real problem. So in the long plan, which is this, it should say eliminate. Okay, I know we have a plan to get there over a period of time.
I would concur with eliminate if you'll agree on boldly.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Thank you. Good.
Okay. That's good. A10.3. So the greenhouse gas inventory, That's part of our climate action plan. And I know that there is an every 5-year schedule for that, but it's kind of out of sync with what we're really working with right now a lot, and dictates a lot of what we're doing in terms of what fuels are going to be being used in buildings. And so the REACH codes and the building codes, new building codes, come out every 3 years. I think that's a good time to evaluate how effective we're doing and remeasure the greenhouse gas emission inventory. So I would like to change that from 5 years to 3 years, just so that the works line up. On page 22, A11.1, it's an action. It talks about, in the second sentence, to provide a living wage, which is a often poorly defined term, if it's defined at all. A lot of people just shoot it around as, you know, it's some kind of a contextless word that means, well, it's a wage people can live on. But typically it turns out not to be a wage people can live on. So, you know, really, if we're looking to provide a living wage under this category, we're talking about jobs to resident match. It should say a wage that's indexed to the to the established cost of living. Because, you know, you can't have a living wage if you don't know what the cost of living is, and you're not creating a living wage if you don't index the wage to the cost of living. So if we go down here, on page 23, it talks about first source hiring. I just wanted to add my high five to that. That it's a successful program that's being done in other areas, not here, but it does provide for local people working on new jobs that are created as a part of the approval process. So I think it makes sense to link the two, and so I support that. Regarding, I think I heard something down here about fiscal neutrality. I also support that as it's written. And under LU 14 here, if we go down to, on page 24, LU 14, also, collaborate and communicate with other public agencies regarding regional issues. This is something that we can always improve on. So in general, without any of the smaller parts of that policy, the overall goal is very important, and I would support that because we're talking about emergency services, we're talking about transportation, climate, water, all of these things. It's huge, and I know there's a lot of that done already. The Plan Bay Area in particular, I functioned with, and I'm amazed at the fact that many people have no idea what the Plan Bay Area 2050 is. I know we all in this room do, but some other people have no idea, and it's one of the most important planning documents in the Bay Area. So if we go down to the circulation section, where we talk about Vision Zero, I want to say that Vision Zero is a concept that came up some years back when we were working on the Complete Streets Plan? Yeah. Sustainable Streets Plan, probably 2012. And I think that it has kind of been missing. I've had actually people actually saying on Nextdoor, oh, well, San Mateo doesn't have a Vision Zero program or a policy. And actually we do, but it just hasn't been spoken about very much in quite a while. And I think where there is like a kind of a definition of Vision Zero, in fact, right here under this policy, P1.3, which was discussed by another member earlier, it could be a little stronger. If we kind of reword it, I would start with the second sentence and say that we use a safe system approach for transportation planning, street design operations, in an effort to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries, okay? Or in order to eliminate okay? So not instead of work toward, okay? So I would leave that softer language out and say that we're going to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on our roadway and just be fully committed to it. On page 35, we talk about parking maximums. I just want to note that last night, the Senate approved Assembly Bill 2097. It's going to the governor's desk. Assembly Bill 2097 will eliminate parking requirements at projects that are within certain distances of transit. So if the governor signs it, that would be quite effective at not only reducing cars from what might otherwise be heavily trafficked areas and reduce VMTs and cut emissions, but also improve the affordability, because many more houses can be built in the same space for that same amount of money without having the parking there. It improves the affordability, and the people who do purchase or lease in those buildings are not paying for parking they don't need because they live next to transit. So I just wanted to add that context.
Through the chair, can I actually jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
I just wanted to note that I don't think that precludes the need for parking maximums, because there was actually a project that came to Planning Commission, was it last week, where by state law, the developer was only required to build half a parking space per unit, but chose to build 1 parking space per unit, chose to build twice as many that were needed.
Right. I didn't say we don't need parking maximums. I just said in certain places we won't need parking at all.
Yep.
Outside of those areas, we do need parking maximums.
Excellent. I just wanted to make it clear that that bill is not going to eliminate the need for that policy.
Right. Thank you. So then there's, I think, one other thing. I made a couple notes of lawyerese that I detected several times in speech here tonight. Regarding LUP 2.2, there were comments earlier. And this speaks about allowing density intensity bonuses based on provision. So there were comments earlier about doing it differently and seeking to use public benefit, allowing public benefit to developers who seek to use increased amounts of housing affordability in their project in exchange for greater height and density. And I just want to, having worked in the area of construction, development, knowing about negotiations between developers and contractors and workers, and that I know that when the a percentage of affordability in a project gets pushed up, it can still get built. It won't hinder the buildability or the constructability of the project. What it will do is push the developers to seek cheaper labor. And we've seen that in the past. We've seen people here from Colorado and New Mexico because it's not against the law. And they can live in trailers on the street, and they can work for less and send their money home to some other community, which will benefit from the wage dollars. So we have to be careful with how far we seek to push the envelope because the developer does have other ways to make the problem do what he calls penciling out. Yeah. Under, I guess, well, I wanted to just make a general comment, I guess, maybe. Regarding micro-mobility sharing, I think there was some comment about seeking to make all that stuff possible. I was in a CCAG committee meeting yesterday, the Congestion Management and Environmental Quality meeting, where we actually recommended approval of a bunch of projects to CCAG for micro-mobility, some micro-mobility projects. But one of the things was scooters in general, in particular, really concerned me because scooters really need smooth streets. The safety with those small wheels on streets with holes the size of a wheel, okay, is a serious issue. And if a front wheel goes into a deep enough hole, this is not unknown. You can find it on the internet. Scooter riders go head over heels onto the road. And so it's a serious safety issue. And I don't know if our roads are quite there, but I just want to say I love the idea of shared micromobility, okay? But there are some details that need to be ironed out. And so we as a city should strive to make that possible, especially bicycles, okay? That's doable now, but I'm very leery of scooters. And I think that's about it. That's about it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Eric?
All right. One question that I had that came up from this discussion is just kind of clarifying the process. You know, we've discussed a lot of great ideas, and some of them have been kind of word changes, and some have been, you know, completely new policy. And I'm curious for like some of like the entirely new policy proposals or major changes to existing policy. Is it just as simple as just like changing the wording on here and then having it approved by council, or would it need to be like follow the normal process and be fleshed out and getting public input and things like that? And I'm referring to things like fixed office to housing ratios and like indexing wages and things like that are good ideas, but they need to be more than kind of just added on to this document and approved, in my opinion.
There'll be a process for bringing these in, allowing for public input, and then when we prepare a full draft general plan, further discussion to flesh out. I think, yeah, some of the minor text edits or grammatical changes, those are easier to fold in, but some of those bigger policy will start with whether the council wants to see them folded in, and then we could go through the process of further evaluating and determining how best to fold them in or what potential ramifications could be.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the most talked about section, the goal LU1 in the land use element, I agree with the balanced and affordability word changes. And the one other thing that I had in my notes that I'm not sure how big a deal this is, but it says all that stuff and job opportunities for citizens, for all citizens. And I'm just wondering if we might want to change the word citizens to residents, only because I know we have a lot of residents in our city that aren't necessarily citizens. So that was only one last addition if we change every single word in that thing, I think by the time we're done with it, but that's what I was going to propose. I mean, I found myself having the same situation as Adam described much earlier, is just saying, yes, I agree with this, I agree with this. So many of the vast majority of everything here I thought was great. And some things that I found myself saying, let's see, I'm trying to just go through my notes all over the place now. I think after all this time I would have it all organized by now, but well, let me start with some of the things that that I would like to see that I think we're kind of missing, and I guess we'll start with I think that in terms of supporting small businesses. One of the things that I would like to see added is how our city is moving in the direction of kind of reallocating public space to help some of our small businesses, and particularly our restaurants. I don't know how strongly we would put that, but I think council has already started moving in that direction, and I would like to have some more wording in there, so looking for additional opportunities, perhaps generally, not just with outdoor seating, but just taking, consistently looking at our public spaces, especially those reserved mostly for cars, and looking at if they could be put to kind of more for wider variety of uses. I don't know what the specific wording of that would be, but that's one area. Another area, it kind of, I also had a similar point that Cliff made about supporting remote work options. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting in this, because we're always reminded that we're looking out out to the 2040 horizon, which is quite a ways out. And it seemed to me just in general that I know we can't predict technology and we can't predict how people are going to live, that far out. But certain trends, I'm thinking about autonomous vehicles and things like that. It seems to me like we're kind of not really taking those trends into account, not assuming that nobody's going to be driving a car in 5 years, but just like what land use might look like if some of these trends come to fruition, which sounds like they very well might. I have this section in my notes that I couldn't think of a better term, but than obsolete leftovers, and I kind of feel like one thing I would have liked to have in this process, now it's probably kind of too late, but for some of when your team was going through all of the existing ones, it would have been if there were some kind of like questionable ones where like, do we still want this in there? Does it still make sense? Like the healthy food in schools was something that I flagged. I mean, of course we all want healthy food in schools and nobody would be against that. But is this something that our city is actively gonna pursue? This seems to me like something that like was probably a big issue in the 80s and some politician put this in there and everybody said, yeah, let's do it. Or maybe at the time it was very, very important that this information got out. And now it's just kind of floating there and nobody has the guts to kind of take it out because nobody's against that. A similar one that's kind of different is the policy LUP 3.6, the hotels one, encourage development of hotels in commercial areas and allow small bed and breakfast hotels in mixed-use areas. I mean, I think that hotels, we get a lot of taxes from them and we like hotels, but this just seemed to be another one of those kind of outdated ones where, I mean, does San Mateo have any bread and breakfasts? And are we really encouraging, with the housing shortage that we have, are we really encouraging hotels development? So that was just a general kind of theme I was seeing as I was reading through this. I also found what I believe to be a minor typo on, let's see, where is it? On policy LUP 1.3, I think it should be component to provide, or maybe I'm misreading it, but it caught me when I was, okay. So let's move to the circulation. Things that I strongly agreed with was most of it. I really do like how, just probably for the first time in this process, cars are not the main focus. It really was evident that I think that if a historian was looking through these over time, that there definitely seems to be kind of like a pivotal changing point right now, which I'm very happy to see. I also like the expansion of TDM strategies and encouragement. That I'm assuming was not that strong in the last element. I also like the parking management elements that kind of move away from, just build more parking and focus on ways on better managing the parking and the demand for parking better. So another thing that that I would kind of like to see at a higher level, and this is a concern I kind of brought up when we were taking the circulation element, the option where we're going to be a regional transportation center. I would like some language that kind of puts the goal that we make sure that as we're striving for that goal of being the regional hub, that we're also making sure we're prioritizing local projects as well. Like they're not getting crowded out by the larger regional initiatives. Another comment I had that was based on one of the comments I heard about kind of swapping out terms like bicycle, pedestrian wording and things like that. I think it's important I think it's important to err on the side of keeping common terms that everybody tends to understand and know about, and not inserting jargon that maybe only experts or maybe people in the know understand, because I think this document's pretty intimidating as is, and I think that when we start taking out common terms that everybody knows, it gets it becomes like the Latin of medieval times where no one really can understand it except experts. Let's see. I think those are pretty much my high level comments.
That's great. Thank you. One totally nitpicky thing, but I'm just going to toss it out. I don't want to debate the use of the Oxford comma, but I will ask that people please be consistent. I noticed as I read through here, sometimes we have the comma before the conjunction at the end of the list, and sometimes we don't. Pick one, go with it. Yeah, that's okay.
I vote for Oxford comma.
We can. Okay, now we're going to go into the discussion period, and if it devolves to that level, I will have to turn to my journalist brother. They don't use the Oxford comma under AP rules. But it is getting a little late, but we talked about having a discussion, so I'd like to open it up to anybody who wants to just bring up something that came up tonight or hasn't come up, and we can discuss as see fit.
I only have one, so I thought maybe I'd just jump in with it.
Jump in, Heather.
So,
please.
Ken, you mentioned about the shared parking, and I like the idea of using the private space a little better, but I want to be careful about it because I want to make sure we're freeing up public space. So basically that we're not keeping all of our public garages and then adding more parking near downtown, but that we do it thoughtfully. I like the idea of the shared. I just, we have a lot of open spaces in our public garages, so we don't necessarily need more.
Yeah, no, so my point, and maybe hopefully I was clear, is that, but as we develop in the downtown, most of the developments include parking as the parking requirement. So, and most of the developments now are mixed use. But there have been studies that have shown, like, you build an office building and then everybody clears out, right? And then all that parking that was there is just empty. And it's just something that we could essentially use if we had some sort of agreement. So, and I don't know whether or not this is the case with the new development at Trags or the Windy Hill properties on the other side of the railroad tracks, or if we talk about it in the new development when Drager's gets rebuilt. The idea is that, all that parking can still be used, for the downtown. It's like dual purpose in some way. So
it's actually being done. Windy Hill already allows that in their properties.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but
so
not
some
every
other.
developer wants to do it, right? This came up 2 weeks ago where the Planning Commission asked them to implement shared parking for Caltrain riders, and they said no.
Yep.
So having a policy or agreement in place that enforces it, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, no, so I know, like, for example, like Drager's right now currently wouldn't do it because of the liability. They're worried about something that happens down the garage. But if you drive down underneath, while the whole downtown parking and all of our facilities are completely full, you drive down there and there's like all these empty spots downstairs. So
Although they are allowed to charge for parking in their space. Yeah. So if they're charging, then maybe there's an attendant making sure there's not a car fire in the garage and things like that. I think for safety, something like that has to be done. So it's more than just leaving the door open and letting people park to it.
Yeah, I think it's residential buildings that have the difficulty, but commercial buildings tend to be much more open to that kind of policy.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the shared use and then free up like the parking garage that's in the center. Like, can we do something better with that space? So I just didn't want us to get into to have a policy where we're basically adding more parking downtown without critically thinking about our needs and using it the most efficiently we can.
One of the things, I have a few things I wanted to discuss, so I'll just jump in. And it's a couple of those, like I mentioned, we want to switch some word choice around. So CA2.7 says encourage parking to be unbundled in new residential developments. Do we want that encourage to be require? Because again, when it's bundled, those spots are assigned to specific units, and especially when we're talking about transit-oriented development, not everybody may have a car, and now you have empty parking spaces.
Yeah, as far as I can see it, I don't see I mean, we may have to figure out whether that's problematic at certain development sizes, but I think that I would totally support that. I don't see a downside at this
It already
stage.
seems to be happening. I think staff can correct me, but the past, 3-4 projects that have come before Planning Commission, the developers are touting it as a feature. Our parking is going to be unbundled. So it kind of seems like the winds are already moving in that direction, and I think we can just push it.
I think it is a TDM measure that developers can use, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's appropriate in a general plan. I might actually agree with the policy if called upon to support the council deciding to do that, but they would have to take build in the appropriate exceptions if necessary, flexibility where possible. So I'd probably support sticking with encourage as a general plan matter, and then have the city council with staff looking at it over the next 10 to 15 years, hopefully sooner, to see is this feasible under the life of the general plan.
So I'm kind of along the lines with Cliff. I mean, I completely agree that we should do that, but I feel like at the general plan, like this is something that I think maybe should be discussed at the Planning Commission, and where all the planning commissioners and planning staff go through when there's an analysis. So I'm okay with encourage at the moment. I would love for it to be required, but I don't know if I'm comfortable making that decision here tonight.
Well, I think it will be discussed at the Planning Commission and the City Council, so I'm just going to vote that I agree with the required.
Another one on my list, I feel like we might get the same answer from the group, was one was around encourage to require a new and existing developments to share parking between uses, but we just discussed that with the shared use agreement. And then the next one was CA7.2. Right now it says evaluate dynamic parking pricing strategies that fluctuate based on peak parking and/or district level parking demands. I was going to ask, do we want to push from evaluate to implement dynamic parking pricing?
What was that number again?
C-A7.2. Should parking be, I actually don't know what it is right now. Is it $1 an hour downtown? Should it be $1 an hour all day, or should we require it to go up at peak demand times?
I mean, that might come down to, where the resources are for the city. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how this gets implemented longer term, but, the city will have to eventually dedicate funds to accomplish that. I don't know.
I'd love to hear what Sue Ellen would say about that.
Yeah.
And put her on the spot, sorry, since you're here.
I am on the spot. That is something that's in our downtown parking management plan to evaluate for the future. So in terms of setting the policy in the general plan, that is something that we had intended to bring to City Council for policy setting as an option in the future.
Great. I think my comment just goes back to what committee member Bonilla said, which is if we're thinking about a 2040 horizon, if we get to 2040 and we're not doing dynamic parking, are we going to regret that? But yeah, I think there's some wiggle room in all of this wording.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, though I see the general plan as a little more, overarching goals than down to the nitty gritty, but I'm confident that Planning Commission, staff, council will go into the nitty gritty. Just a general comment, I kind of touched on these in my specific comments, but I think the general plan, among other things, should be putting a heavy emphasis, and maybe it doesn't enough, on traffic efficiency, infrastructure, calming, and parking plays into that. But all this, because we have growth, that's happening. It's going to happen no matter what we want. We want to try and make it smart, but there's a big chunk of our resident base, not citizens, resident base, good point, that are concerned about the impacts on traffic and their experience living here. And I think the general plan needs to show that we're addressing that, because I think that's essential to not only respond to their concerns, but also to allow for the kind of development we actually need, and to do one without looking at the other is going to just end up getting more, I'll be quite frank, Measure M type motion, in the city. And I think, that doesn't reflect the majority of the city, in my opinion, but it's an activist group that I think should be heard, but not in a way that gets riled up. The other would be, and maybe this is more my pet issue.
Cliff, before you go on to the next
please.
issue, can I comment on that? So I think I understand where you're coming from, and I actually agree with it. I think that what this general plan is doing is it's moving away from the kind of the 20th century concept of, you solve traffic by increasing road capacity, and you solve traffic by getting people out of cars. And I think that right now you highlighted a good point. We're not making that connection where we could in these goals and actions. And I think that it should be a little bit more explicit.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you, I agree with you, but it's all the above, because by 2040, if I'm still here, I hope to be able to have this discussion. Well, I'm older than you. I'll be 80, I guess, so close to it. Yeah, I'll be here, I hope. But seriously, if, at that point, it is going to be a different universe than what we see, and hopefully very little in the way of of people getting in their gas guzzlers and going. I mean, we're already moved very far away from that. But I think we also have to have in the plan things that are responsive in the next, say, 5 to 10 years as well. And that doesn't mean adding a lane to 101 or El Camino, but that's, we do traffic calming, we do redirecting, we stop left turns, limit that. There's a lot of steps that aren't solving the problem, but they mitigate the problem and allow us to develop and grow the way we need to.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah, I think we are too. The other issue, which is probably something, Adam, that I think you'll like as well, because we both have similar backgrounds on this, is this idea of mixed use, which we have in the plan, and I tried to highlight it a little bit in a couple spots with, as we talk about mixed use, we almost always talk about office and residential, but it's also commercial services and products, because that's really how these new neighborhoods or changed neighborhoods function better, and it also cuts traffic down the line. Anyway, Just tossing that out there.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And
Red
pollution.
meat for you.
Oh,
And pollution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Through the chair, I have one more discussion question for the group.
go for it.
LU-P8.7, healthy food in schools. I know you just said you weren't sure that this should be in the general plan, but if it's going to be in the general plan, should we add some language around explore or encourage or incentivize plant-based foods in school, given our climate goals? Again, if we're looking at 2040 and we're serving kids beef, that seems out of alignment of our climate goals.
I
And I intentionally
share that
suggested
view.
soft
I share the
language.
view, but I'm afraid I agree with Eric that it really is kind of out of our purview. It's an outdated thing. I mean, I wish the city. I mean, the last time I saw the city take any steps here, it had to do with vending machines in Central Park. You know, really. I mean, that's what we do. We don't impact the schools that way, do we?
Yeah, so I'm going to put my school district hat on and say that this is sort of in the school district's realm versus the city's realm. So I can understand if the city wants to go ahead and move forward with some sort of goal that's there, but it is within the purview of the school district and not the city. So whether it's holdovers or legacies that Eric talked about, I would agree that this might be something that was back in the 80s and somebody put it in here and we're like, hey, this sounds like a great idea. But in reality, the city doesn't really have any control over this.
So I do want to, though, pick up on kind of a corner of that discussion because I saw a couple of other places in the plan where it talked about making sure that in neighborhoods, healthy food is provided at stores, right? And it listed this kind of store, that kind of store, and convenience stores where there's not much in the way of healthy food. You can get milk, you can get bread, you know, but most what's there is like basic, what people walk out of there with is not healthy food, right? So I kind of wondered about actually in the plan promoting that as some use that we want to preserve in these neighborhoods because I never ever go to any of those stores, you know, and so I know other people do, I guess, but you're not, if your goal is to preserve healthy food options, which is what the discussion was prefaced on, that's not where you get that, so.
I want to pick up on a different thread. I think maybe your bigger point is, I don't know that this needs to be school specific, and maybe that's the problem we're having, but I think your overarching goal is more like a climate goal, which is when we have the opportunity to encourage food providers to provide food that will, you know, support our climate goals, I think we should do it, whether that's the school district, whether that's, you know, the food banks to the extent they can, you know, that kind of thing. I think it's all providers. But maybe that does go back to the question of, is the city doing that, or is that more like a public
There's a
health
state
county?
law, SB 1383, that's going to be requiring that all fruit, for instance, that's produced in everybody's backyards, instead of just letting it fall and rot or get tossed into the grain bin and hauled away, where it's emitting huge amounts of methane, before it falls and rots, it should be harvested and given to people so they can eat it. Mm-hmm. That's a new state law, and the county is going to be taking that on. They're going to build an actual organization that's going to be seeking to collect all that food. Yeah. So there's one way to do some of that, right?
Yeah, I would say that having fresh produce available, you know, in local neighborhoods is probably the biggest thing that, I don't know how we affect that directly, but that seems to be the key thing that people need access to in like a very short amount of time because it goes bad over time.
Right. Really, the thing is to produce in an urban area like this enough food to really make a difference. It takes a lot of land.
Yeah.
You know, if everybody has a little plot like 4 feet by 8 feet, you know, where they grow their own, that's not going to make a whole lot of a difference.
No, I'm talking
because you get like maybe 10 people in this piece of land and 10 other families in that other piece of land, you know, that's a half a mile away, and you know, so we have to figure out if we're going to do that, a way to do it on a larger scale.
Yeah, I'm more talking stores.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
well, stores are going to sell what they think is marketable. They buy, you know, we're going to find a really tough time trying to dictate to stores what food you buy and how you sell it.
Well,
Yeah.
and to that point, even in the world that I also operate in, Samaritan House, which distributes more food than anyone else in this county, you've got to treat people with dignity, and part of that means giving what they want. And, handing out bags of what you think is good for them, or that is locally sourced or whatever, is really a slap in the face. And the movement's actually away from giving out bags, which we're still doing, lots of, to having, trying to wait for COVID to totally calm down, but to actually having, we've already set one up, basically a free grocery store, where if you're approved, you can come in and the families can pick and choose what they want. And that tends to dictate.
Yeah,
Maybe it's
I
about the
agree.
choice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's where we're trying to go with this is like make sure that it's accessible for people to choose, right? Not that we're trying to dictate, but that we're trying to like make it available.
But I agree with you, and it's kind of to a point that Rick made. It really is, I think it's about access. And you may not go to the little corner store, but I mean, there was stuff written years ago about liquor stores in underprivileged neighborhoods, and isn't that terrible? Well, actually, yeah, I mean, maybe we'd like to say, well, why they have liquor, but guess what they do? They provide some foods and services that are necessary. And in our model, I think we're talking about a situation where we're trying to cut down on people traveling, they're going to go to the Safeway or whatever occasionally, but they can get stuff, whether it's milk or, they may get a Slurpee as well or whatever, but it's there and they're not driving for it. Anyway, there are bigger issues there that may be beyond our general plan about how to make us all eat healthier.
Now we know what to get you for the holidays.
Yeah.
As my daughter goes off to college, I think some of my eating habits will improve.
I just want to say, I agree with so much of what other people have said, and the insights have been great. I want to emphasize a couple things, just so it's like, just to be a backer. I like what you said, Ken, about making King Center its own separate policy and going beyond simply maintenance. It's a vital spot. There's a lot of potential and use there now, and there's a lot of people that live there, and there's going to be more people that live within walking distance of it. And then also adding recycled water policy. I think that's a good one to include, because that's a big issue. And it should be in our plan. And then I do love Eric's comments about changing citizens to residents. But yeah, I'm just nodding my head to a lot of what people said.
Yeah, I just want to say that I thought this was a great session. I wish we had maybe a little more for the public listening in, but hopefully the staff and consultants got a lot of feedback that can help improve the draft, and I enjoyed it. It was good. There were some great comments. Anything else? Get out a few minutes early?
Yeah.
I'm just going to make a general comment that, we were joking before that this is our last meeting of the year. Is that as the GPS? And so obviously our makeup will change next summer. And so I just want to thank everybody, because, it's a long road on this committee. And so I'm excited to hear what everybody's comments have been, and thank, Chair Robbins and Heather for being on the chair and the vice chair.
I'd like to say also, when you're done.
Yeah, I was going to say we should adjourn and go get Slurpees, but go ahead, you can have your comment.
Okay, I just want to say, as the mayor and as a council member, and having been on this committee since its inception, I want to thank all of you, everybody, including my colleague here, Eric, everybody, and the staff, for it's not been a simple process, but it's a worthwhile process. So everybody's efforts are truly, deeply appreciated. And for the public who's watching this and trying to figure out what we're doing, have patience, please. Thank you.
I just
We
realized
will miss you guys.
Cliff might be the only one that's going to see this thing from the very beginning to the very end.
Yeah.
Really?
I'm looking.
Jeez.
So
If I'm still,
Yes.
oh, yeah.
It's your general plan.
you're right. If you can make it.
And then I'll have to move up to Nevada County to get the hell out of here. Thanks, everybody. I think this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.